Warning, this broadcast contains content for adults only. Listener discretion is advised.
We have such sights to show you.
MonsterHives.com presents the Beer and the Brandy podcast. Today, AJ and Eric discuss Hellraiser, the 1987 feature film. Here's AJ and Eric.
So before we begin our retrospective of the 1987 horror film Hellraiser, written and directed by Clive Barker, a movie that late legendary critic Roger Ebert declared was suffering from a bankruptcy of imagination. And we'll see how much we both end up agreeing or disagreeing with that. But before we get on with it, I think it may be fun, Eric, for both of us to offer a phrase, a bold headline, or to be apropos to the film we're discussing. Let's chain together a few words that best describes your main impression of this film. And the cryptic, the better. So if you were writing an essay on what you came away with after watching Hellraiser 1987, what would be your essay's title, Eric?
Yeah, if I had to title an article or something, I'd call it Hellbound Hearts and Angelic Butchery.
Intriguing. Now we're going to just leave that untouched for now. And my takeaway from the film would be titled simply 3 words: a cautionary tale. And I can't wait to delve in so we both can elaborate on the substance behind our titles. But for now, let's get into it. So, Hellraiser 1987 begins by pulling out of this strange gold and brown cube resting on a small table, revealing we are in, I believe it's Morocco. And there are 2 men sitting at that table, and one, played by actor James Hong, appears to be a merchant, and the other, played by actor Sean Chapman, appears to be his customer. Then the merchant says, "What's your pleasure, Mr. Cotton?" And the customer replies, "The box." And for a wad of $50 bills and then another wad of $100 bills, the merchant tells the customer to take the box. It's yours. And then follows it up with something cryptic saying, "It always was." So, Eric, assuming our audience wouldn't listen to this retrospective without watching and knowing this film beforehand, in context of the entire movie, I want to ask you, what do you think this merchant is suggesting by saying the box was always his? Is Frank preordained to get the box, or is this a indication that time isn't linear, or is this just a statement that the puzzle box is less already owned by Frank, but rather owned by his kind, belonging to all people who are deviants, to poorly categorize them, but ones who have an insatiable need to push past what's considered the common decency of sensation. So, do you have any ideas?
Well, I think it's pretty much in line with what you initially said. It's implying it's preordained. It's always been yours. But it's one of these things where Hellraiser is very in keeping with Clive Barker's. Clive Barker's, ever since from his childhood when he was writing plays for school, and it went up from there. He's very much had this theme about Faustian bargains and deals with the devil. And when it comes to, even within the first film, it's the puzzle box is something you have to work toward before you get it, in a way. So it could be said that, once you started on this path, by the time you get in a position to being able to get a hold of the puzzle box, which in effect is a gateway, you've already invested yourself so heavily in it. You've already all but solved it. It's just a matter of the physical act of solving it. So, but when he's saying always was, you do get that sense of, it was there for the. It's this thing about it's there if you can take it, sort of thing. But you definitely do get the feeling that because Frank walks away, it's once he's walked away, he just says, like introspectively, it always was. But these are the guardians of the puzzle boxes. That when we get to the end of the film, it becomes clear that these are not just human beings who have this. Because throughout the film, there is a lot about characters who wear masks. Most of the characters in the film, even Kirsty, is putting on some sort of illusion. They're putting on a mask of some sort. And it even comes down to the guardian of the puzzle box, because at the start of the film, you think he's not a very rich looking guy. He's very ordinary. He's offered money, but he doesn't take it. You think he's absolutely powerless. And by the end of the film, it's clear he's one of the most powerful characters in it. So you get the sense he would know, if anybody would, that, it's always been yours, Frank. You were destined to go down this path.
Well, I think you suggested here that he's not human, and I think it's fair to say that you're much more experienced in the lore than I am. To be honest with you, I'm only familiar with a few movies, this one specifically the most, and then a couple of the sequels, but I haven't really delved into the lore. I know there's a lot of comic books and so forth. This wasn't clear to me, even at the end of the movie, that...
Well, that's what I'm thinking of, the very end of it, what happens with the puzzle box, and there's a guardian that comes along at the end.
Right, but I didn't suspect this merchant was a guardian as well, and or anything other than human. Now, obviously, he's tied in to this... conspiracy is the wrong word, but to this event from reoccurring, this tied in to this event and helps it reoccur. But yeah, at least I never got that perception.
Yeah, but it always comes back into his possession, because at the end, the whole film does this. It's like in The Terminator. It's got this comes full circle sort of thing, where he's just saying to another person who we've never met before, "What's your pleasure, sir?" And he's got this puzzle box on the table. I think it's even the same location, or it's one very similar. But it's clearly something. He knows Frank. He's not had dealings with him, but he knows him. He knows of him. He knows his life. That's why he's offered the puzzle books. Now, it is useful for people who might not be aware, who might be watching this and they only know the film. This was initially a novella. It was a kind of a shortish story called The Hellbound Heart, which is what part of my thing comes from. And in that, it does elaborate on some things, and some of that is the guardian of the puzzle box. And apparently in that version, Frank had to do some favors for him, but he said they weren't very big favors, they were just little favors. So you got the sense that he was being tested. Do you really want this? And it's just one of the... He's functional as a gatekeeper archetype. Yeah. But to be a gatekeeper of the puzzle box, he clearly knows what the puzzle box is. So he's plugged into it somehow. But you're never really, even in the expanded media, you're never really given a handle on truly what those people are. But they are part of it. They are the ones who find people, and they give them the nudge to have it, because this is your reward. But there's always a catch. But yeah, I got the sense that he was saying, well, it always was, because you've come this far. You are so corrupted. And that's essentially what it's telling the audience. It's saying, this is it. It was always yours, because once the audience finds out what the puzzle box does, you realise, well, if he's saying it always was, he's clearly been this hedonistic and extreme for a very long time.
Yeah. So also in this first scene, moving on, I immediately picked up that these performances, or a lot of these performances, were dubbed. Something that seems
Yes.
to occur with several of the characters throughout the whole film. Now, I believe I heard that because Hellraiser was filmed in England and everyone had British accents, that they wanted to market this for US audiences, but I'm not certain about that.
Yeah, rewatching the film today, it's not really clear the film knows where it wants to be set, because even the
Yeah.
removal guys have American accents, and there's a person that finds when Kirsty is later, she faints unconscious, and there's just someone on the street that passes by. He's got like a New York hat, and he's got an American accent, and it's very. And there's also some stuff like the police have guns or something. It's not very clear. I think some of the dubbing was due to one of the actors having an American accent and the other one had it was to do because they were brothers, and I forget which one it was, but one of them I think had a British accent and one of them an American accent, but because they were brothers they had to make them both have the same accent. It's a bit convoluted. I'm not quite sure of the exact details, but
Yeah, I think
yes.
they changed Sean Chapman here, who is Frank. I think he was the
Yeah,
one
that
that had
sounds right.
the British accent, but for some
Oh,
reason, I really like. Go ahead.
well, I was just going to say, talking about Frank and accents, I discovered the other day an actor who did come along into the franchise in one of the far-along sequels that you and me are very aware of. He's been in an absolute ton of films, and he was going to be Frank, Lance Henriksen.
Mm.
And if you now like rewatch it with that knowledge in mind, you can actually quite imagine Lance Henriksen's voice and his face as he was then in that role. I think he had to choose between this and Near Dark. So I think out of the two, he would have either way. It would have been a career thing. But yeah. So if you rewatch it, imagine Lance Henriksen in the role of Frank. It could have worked, I think, differently, but he would have had when you're talking about Frank and the voice, he would have had that kind of gravelly.
Actually, if it was one or the other, I prefer him in Near Dark. I kind of like that
Yeah.
aliens reunion, and actually that movie I think is what is the phrase I'm looking for? Well, it's definitely it deserves a lot more notoriety than it currently has.
Yeah.
And
It's a cult classic, but it's not as well known as it should be.
yeah, I think it is definitely a better film than the spotlight it's received. And I could see it even forgotten about in another 50 years. And it's a shame. But you know what? I like, there was a similar film that had a lot of dubbing, and it was the Mel Gibson Mad Max film, the first film. And at least here for America, they dubbed the entire thing because they didn't feel they could market, even though it was in English, they didn't think they could market to US audiences a film with actors with Australian accents. So they dubbed them entirely, and it gave it such an entirely otherworldly feel that once I finally heard the Australian version, it wasn't the same. It actually lost something. It became more authentic, but lost something surreal about it. I don't quite know how to explain it, but I hope that this is the version I always will know of Hellraiser, because I can't imagine any of these lines being delivered in any other way.
No, talking about the voices, it's just reminded me something I noticed when I was rewatching it. Claire Higgins, she's Julia. She's got a very pronounced English accent in this, and I think Larry even says, "Oh well, you're back to your old." I forget what he said. He doesn't say stomping ground, but it's, it's where you grew up or something. But then there's a moment later on where Kirsty is talking to her boyfriend, and she's talking about, oh, she's so rigid, and he's talking about, all of you are, you've got that English sentimentality, but he's speaking with and he's saying, oh, do we? But he's speaking with an American accent.
Yeah.
And it kind of, I got the feeling he was meant to be British as well, but because he had an American accent, that it didn't quite have the effect it was meant to in the script. But,
well, they were originally in Brooklyn.
Curious.
We know that. But yeah,
because they talk about it in the film. Yeah, that's where they were. And
certainly the film's location falls apart the more scrutiny you give it.
Yeah, it's one of those films. I mean, a lot of this is because Clive Barker, he had done short films before, but he had never done a proper film. And he says in interviews, he said that at the time, he didn't know the difference between a 10mm lens and a 35mm lens. He said you could have literally given him a plate of spaghetti and told him that's a lens, and he said there was a good chance he would have believed you. He had to rely a lot on his director of photography and stuff. So he'd written it, but he was directing it. It was very much a learning process, but everyone was very forgiving towards him. So it was a good atmosphere on set. But yeah, little things like this, he regards it as a very flawed production. So I think it's one of those films that, blasphemy, it could be remade and it could be improved in things here and there. But I mean, for a first-time film, it's very, very effective. But you have to keep in mind it is the director's first film, so things like this, it's not going to be as polished as it should have, and he'd be the first one to admit that.
Yeah. So next we see Frank, assumingly home on these bare floorboards of a dark, dingy attic, and lit candles are surrounding him as he tries to manipulate and solve the puzzle box that he just acquired from this merchant
over in Morocco. And you think he's doing it somewhere in Morocco, and I thought, why is he getting resurrected over in Britain? But it's clear he's waited all this long, travelled over to England before he even started, and you get the feeling that he's such a hedonist he wouldn't wait that long. But it's another of those little, you have to forgive the film for.
Yeah, I was first thinking that maybe it took this long for him to solve the puzzle box, but then once Kirsty was able Kirsty was able to do it within 10 seconds, unless perhaps we'll get there, but when Pinhead...
Maybe she's more intelligent, who knows?
Well, maybe. But so as Frank progresses manipulating the puzzle box, these eerie lights begin to start pushing through the boarded walls. And when he finally pushes the box into a new configuration, the box sparks and these chained hooks shoot out of the box and hook into his flesh. And Frank screams. Then next, it appears that time has passed because there's these camera shots from rooms to rooms in the empty house. And it feels like it hasn't been kept up. And then we see, or we find out that Frank's body has been torn into pieces, hung and strewn all over the room, as these strange beings appear, later to be revealed as the Cenobites, one male and one female, and they seem to survey the scene. The male, known as Pinhead, crudely then reassembles the torn skin of Frank's face on the floor and then realigns the puzzle box to its original form. And then the room turns back into an empty attic, like no bloody massacre has ever occurred here at all. So, Eric, let's talk Cenobites. We got them early in the film here. I believe that was only two that appear in that first scene. The ones known as Pinhead and Deep Throat in the lore. I believe.
And she has another name which is a little dirtier, but yeah.
All right, we'll stick with Deep Throat then, because that's dirty enough.
But it must be said, Clive Barker himself absolutely hates the name Pinhead.
Yeah,
Within the script, it's just lead Cenobite, and then I think in the book it's called Hell Priest. But he's never actually given a title, and he wrote I think it was Scarlet Gospels, where the character is addressed as Pinhead, and everybody who calls him Pinhead dies this incredibly bloody death. It's like Clive Barker is saying, "Don't call this guy Pinhead." He really hates it. But yeah, they were like, I think it was the special effects crew. They just came up with those names behind the scenes. Yeah.
Well, including these Cenobites, right? There was also the Chatterer, Butterball, and the Engineer. And so let's talk about all of them. And I must say, by the way, just first glance, these beings look wild. And I believe it was Clive Barker that coined the phrase that these entities embody, quote unquote, repulsive glamour.
Yes. Yeah, that's I made a note of that actually. It's Jane Wildgoose, the costume designer. And she was saying that's my notes say that he wanted various things, and he's said like areas of revealed flesh where some kind of torture has or is occurring, and something associated with butchery involved, and then what she calls a very Clive Turner phrase I've written down: repulsive glamour. And other notes that I made, he wanted they should be magnificent super butchers. Now, that's part of where my title comes from, the angelic butchery. This, because it's not just how they look. It's just come to mind, this phrase. They come across like S&M Darth Vaders. Because this is not, at the time, there are going to be people who were born way after this film came out. People might not know that in the UK, especially, this was kind of like a British film, but it was made with American money, like a James Bond film. And in the UK, in the early 80s, now this is 87, but still during that time period, there was this big thing in the news that was called video nasties. And now video nasties was this term for very cheaply made horror exploitation kind of things. And the thing about Alien, Predator, to some degree even the Terminator and Hellraiser, is that they did away with this Roger Corman type, monsters, rah, 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 sort of thing. Right from the get-go, you have these figures, and you can see they're mutilated, they're in PVC, but they're walking very, very calmly across. It's a room of, it's desolation and carnage, mutilation everywhere. But they might as well be wearing gas masks walking through World War I trenches. And for them, they are just these dispassionate slabs of granite that just glide through it like great white sharks. And just by doing that, you get this sense they are in absolute control, and they are jaded. They've been there, they've done this. To them, it's a Tuesday. And yet, we look at this, and this would have been, from a visual perspective, something like people had not seen before, because the degree of stuff that was on the costumes and the makeup, this was not the kind of, quote, monster that people were used to seeing at that time. And to some extent, we're still not, but since Hellraiser, there's been a lot of emulation and copying. But Clive Barker, they kind of wanted him to hire, I think, stuntmen, stunt women, and he said, no, actors to do these parts, because there's, even when they haven't got dialogue, there's going to be a lot of body language. They wanted that in the performance, and I think in hindsight it really paid off. And even in that scene, you have Hell Priest, Pinhead, call him what you will, he just leisurely puts his hand down into this filth, and he's just rearranging this face, which clearly was Frank, and he's putting it into a pattern. And again, you're getting this motif of patterns, puzzles, but this is a character who knows how to solve them, but it's very heavily into the occult. But you're getting it. He's playing with Frank's face like another puzzle. And again, it's to do with masks. It's his face. It's his mask. His mask had slipped. He came to grief. But these characters, they have power by doing nothing, just cruising along. In the same way, I mean, I said Darth Vader, but Darth Vader had a similar effect when he was first seen. He's walking along and there's laser bolts going all off, and he's utterly unaffected. He's not caring. He does get a bit emotional, but that's not when Vader is at his most ominous. Vader is at his most ominous when he is just coming towards you, not like a shambling zombie, but just he's a mechanoid. You cannot harm him, and he knows it. These, you get a very similar quality coming through. And although nothing happens with them, that's what makes it powerful. Like, you'd imagine them coming and they'd be making faces to the camera. It would have come across more animalistic, which you get with the engineer, who is something other than a Cenobite. But with these Cenobites, that's what you get. You get it's the essence of a Margaret Thatcher quote when she said, if you have to tell people you're a lady, you aren't. It's the same quality here. If you have to tell people, if one character has to tell another character they're powerful, I'm this, I'm the wizard of blah blah blah, you're not powerful. In The Hobbit, you've got not Frodo, Bilbo Baggins, and he's saying to Smaug, "Oh, I am Bilbo. You know, I see wide, I see far, and I am this." And Smaug the dragon just says, "Oh, lovely titles," and he's just coming towards it. He's not saying a damn thing. And Smaug's got all the power in that scene, and it's not to do with how big he is. It's just the presence. And in this scene, you get something very similar. Here be dragons. And it's a scene of absolute carnage, and they are untouched. And yet you've got spikes coming out of his head and hints of butcher tools and things. And you think, oh, typical, especially for that era, the video nasties, they'd have been like going, I want to get this flesh. And blah. They're not. Walking calmly through it. One of them rearranges it. He knows what he's doing. Like Frank knew what he was doing with a puzzle box. This guy knows what he's doing. He's resetting, and literally everything resets, vanish. And it's such a compelling scene, because you go from absolute chaos and a literal scene of not a hellscape, but a taste of hell on Earth. You go from that to an empty room. And it makes you go, what's that about? Who are they? What's their business with him? What did that? And even when you see what happens to Frank, even they're not doing like stabbing him. They're just calmly acting like umpires at a cricket match. They're just presiding over it. And that's where you get this first hint that this story, but this film is doing something new. It's not freaking out at the camera, even though there are some jump scares. I think they were enforced by the studio. It's a film that tries not to rely on jump scares and slime. It's like Alien. It's like Predator. It's making it all the more. It's doing that less is more approach. And I think with Doug Bradley, who played Pinhead, he said the most valuable piece of advice Clive Barker gave me was do less. Do less. Do less with what you're doing. And it stopped him from exaggerating, and the finished product, everything that character does, it draws you in by doing less, which is interesting because apparently Clive Barker wanted Julia to be the main villain through the series, but it was Pinhead because he's such a compelling figure.
Well, their whole aesthetic was so compelling, that repulsive glamour, that it's important to stress for people that are younger than us, that might not realize that the Cenobites, these designs, actually inspired a subculture back in the day too. During the late 80s and the early 90s. And I remember there was a lot of uproar about it, at least here in the US. And it was in regards to forms of body modification. Now, of course, there's always been forms of body modification throughout human history. Just the act of piercing your ears, right? Or circumcision, or what have you. But
Clive Barker said he was influenced by his own visits to S&M clubs. So partly they are inspired by what was already there. But you're right, when Hellraiser came out, it broke out. It kind of exploded culturally at that time.
Yeah, and it escalated to the point that it inspired of this form. It was a controversial performance art where these body modification artists, inspired by the Hellraiser films, would use their own bodies to emulate puncture wounds and hooks and piercing and stretching of their skin as a art of expressing themselves, as an art form. And if I recall, there was some real outrage over it back then, where opponents saw the art form as mutilation versus modification, and saw it as a result of poor psychological issues. But regardless of how one perceives the art form, and I'm not here to judge that, and I have nothing but love towards everyone, but the Cenobites did impact society, perhaps on a deeper level than your traditional horror villains.
Yes. If anyone is interested in a very good horror film that is all about body modification, there's one with Catherine Isabel, who's one of the two leads in Ginger Snaps, called, I think, as American Mary. And it's very much about body modification and that kind of thing. It's really well done, actually. But that, I don't know if you could say it wouldn't have happened without Hellraiser, but Hellraiser really put that mark on the landscape. And it did tap into something raw in the psyche. It's like when we talk about Lovecraftian things, the mythos is very much playing on Lovecraftian themes. But the look of the Cenobites themselves, it really, like Clive Barker, he did take things from, like he said, one of the main things that did the Pinhead look, he said there were these African sculptures that were all these spikes coming out, and he said they were meant to be symbolic of rage, and yet here the character is the opposite of rage. He's unemotional, he's objective, he is very menacing, but he's that sort of Christopher Lee menace where he could click his fingers. He's in love with the English language. He's this you name a poet and he would have tea with him, and then he would go for an afternoon's mutilation. It's very much in the performance, but just the look. You have people, whole demographics of people that just go to cosplay conventions as Cenobites, and they do their own original things. And I've seen one, but I've heard of it. I haven't seen it. One person did crucify Jesus Christ as a Cenobite, and Doug Bradley looked at it and he went, "Oh, if Clive Barker seen that, he would have loved it." But yeah, it broke the chains, which is ironic because it's all about chains and bondage and stuff. But you have to keep in mind these are not externalized threats. Each Cenobite, I mean, we'll come on to this later, but each Cenobite is symbolic of that individual's fears and desires. That's why they're so unique. And when you see like Deep Throat,
well, let me
she's
stop
had
you
a
right.
fate to do with all that stuff.
Let me stop you right there because I didn't get any of that impression watching this film. Is that something that's more explained within future installments? And
Kind of, yeah. But I mean, because it's all, most of it's like Deep Throat. Her throat is literally, it's splayed open. Butterball, his abdomen has split open and his eyes have been stitched up. It's all about like gluttony and various what you might call sinful. They're not sins, but they're they've led their own path down to extremes of corruption.
maybe vices would be the right word versus sins.
Yeah. But they're very much self-inflicted. Like Pinhead, they're not. I used to think they were sticking out. They're not. They're sticking in. He is gaining. He's doing what Frank later says. When he describes them, he says that is about pain and pleasure indivisible, and they are walking symbolic representations of that. It's almost a theological way because they come across very much like this way is called hell priests. They come across like theologians from hell. Yeah. And they're you say that, but you would get an image of something like a Cenobite. It's a theologian from hell. They're this religious order, whereas where the word Cenobite comes from, it's a member of a monastic order. So it very much deals with these. I think Catholicism was one of the themes that he used for the visual look. Weirdly enough, because it's all very much even about guilt. It all plays into this. So you make these very unique, eye-catching characters, and a lot of people, their favourite isn't necessarily Pinhead, it's Chatterer. Chatterer has no lines whatsoever, but he's just got this, it's just these teeth. And it's just, he's got 2 fingers down Kirsty's mouth. It's very subtextual. And it's just, you go, what is that? What's his backstory? Tell me more. And the film never gives you more. It just goes, nope.
And that's what I love, because I remember the sequel, which we're not going to be discussing here, but I remember learning that Pinhead was a human prior to this.
Yeah.
And I don't bring that part of the universe into this film when I watch this film. This film is the one that has the spotlight on my shelf. This is the one that gets all the rewatches, and I hardly remember like the couple other entries that I've seen. So I try not to bring that into the context of this film, and I try just to analyze it in the context of this. What is it? An hour and a half, roughly, of a film, and.
But they were told on set by Clive Barker, hey, you used to be human in the past. But they didn't know whether that was last week, a million years ago, what.
I see.
So, but that's behind the scenes stuff. When you're in the book, you're not given the impression they were human at all. So when you're watching Hellraiser, the original, in isolation, you just think, what are they? Tell me more. And they're just so different to anything that was there. But I mean, they've got their little seeds in other horror films and plays Clive Barker did also. But these were the amalgamation of all that.
At one moment, I wondered if these were aliens. But
I mean, they are. They call themselves
travelers,
explorers in the further regions of sensation, I think is the quote, which they are astronauts in a way. What would you call it? Sensation nauts. Yep. So they've been out there, and you get this feeling they've been out there in the abyss, literally just exploring sensation. It's not something you can see. It's something that has to be literally experienced. Whatever it is, they've been doing, and they gave Frank a taste And he was an absolute extreme hedonist, and it was too much. It's like magic markers under your nose times a million. No.
All right, so out of these Cenobites here, we got Pinhead, we got Deep Throat, we got Butterball, we got the Chatterer, and
but you only see the two at this point in the
right.
film. Yeah.
But since we're talking Cenobites, and we have the Engineer, which I'm just calling a Cenobite, I know you mentioned isn't one.
Yeah, it's some other category of thing. It's never really made clear, but it's something else.
But just for this conversation, let me group it in. What is your most favorite and least favorite out of this group, this movie? If you have
the Cenobites, I am one of those ones that visually I'm really wowed by Chatterer.
Okay.
Just, I mean, it's, if you've never seen, you just say he looks like a human version of the alien, and you go, "Oh, right, I know that one." But there's a lot of men, because I mean, even just the right at the end of it, you have this great shot where it looks almost like he's wearing a wedding veil, and it's just this bit of material, and it comes away. It's just so visually there, but it's the one that doesn't speak. But in terms of performance, I mean, yeah, okay, you say Pinhead, but the thing is, originally a lot of Pinhead's lines, they were dispersed throughout the entire group, but Chatterer and Butterball, the prosthetics wouldn't let the actors speak, so they gave a lot of the lines to the female and the lead. That's the only reason. Because of that, he did it so eloquently that in later years, I've come to think, that it's the Hell Priest is the epitome of the personality of a Cenobite, because it's just, it all came together there. But in terms of visuals, I'll always go back to, I would have loved it if they gave Chatterer more in general.
Yeah. I love Chatterer. Well, we'll start with my least favorite, and if it's not a Cenobite, I'm still going to include the Engineer here, and it's probably my least favorite. You know, I could look past the...
It was the most fake looking, unfortunately, but...
Yeah, and I was about to say I could look past seeing the behind the scenes workings of this creature. You know, later on the movie, we see like maybe it's attached perhaps to a black painted wheelchair.
Yeah, apparently on the Blu-ray it's really visible. You see someone pushing it along, but I've never.
Yeah, it looks like maybe it's a black suited technician.
Just apparently you can really see it. You can't unsee it, but it's what they had a very low budget at the time. So.
And yeah, it was only $1 million, and then I think it went on to gross something like 14 or 15.
Yeah,
so,
I think 3 days it made its budget back, something like that, some crazy amount. But yeah.
But you know what? It's an 80s movie, so I could forgive seeing the man behind the curtain, so to speak.
I mean, the Engineer goes to like the Roger Corman type of creature, where it is this rah, 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 just running along a wall. But that's all it's meant to do. It's meant to be this like very primitive creature. Maybe it's been there for millions of years and it's just devolved. You never know what it is. It's just a denizen of hell.
It looks too Ghostbusters for me, you know.
Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it. Yeah, very Ghostbusters. Yeah,
too wormy and goofy and too comical. And then perhaps second to least would be Butterball. That somewhat falls in that category with me too. Of
Butterball's the only one that doesn't get. There's the energy thing that gets exiled back into hell. He just has a roof falling on him, and the actor jokes that somewhere out there, Butterball's still running around.
But my favorite, of course, is the obvious one, Pinhead, played by Doug Bradley, who's amazing. And before I go on and rave about Pinhead, I just want to say I do love how Deep Throats makes that little raspy. Like almost like bees or wasps, or
it's like Tina from Bob's Burgers, but really creepy. And you'll notice when Pinhead's walking along, you hear this. It's like the Queen alien. It's this sort of thing. And when she's walking along, you hear like a sort of, it's like a dead cat being strangled.
Yeah.
It's nice because it's like they don't have theme music. Cenobites have disturbing noises in the background because they're the kind of sounds that if you were going through a haunted house and you heard one of those sounds behind you, that's 1,000 times more unsettling than like sort of psycho music. It's that would make it, because I mean, well, come on. I mean, there's a thing where he just looms behind Kirsty and just hear that breathing, and he's not breathing. It's just in his aura, sort of thing. So it's a neat little effect that goes along with the characters.
So Pinhead, played by Doug Bradley, is amazing, and he's my favorite. And I'm actually going to disagree with you here, Eric. But let me get there. His stature, his commanding voice, his costume, his design, and you were mentioning before that this movie in regards to a reboot, but Doug Bradley, those facial appliances perfectly suit his face and his body, and he's tremendous. And to me, it's lightning in the bottle. It's like actor Robert Englund, in the Freddy Krueger makeup and costume, where the magic wasn't the same when they tried another actor as Freddy in that Nightmare on Elm Street reboot. It's just Pinhead and Doug. It's just a culmination of all the right elements on the exterior with the practical effects, combined with all the right elements on the interior. Casting the right human being, the right actor that somehow made Pinhead so iconic.
He is to Pinhead what Harrison Ford is to Han Solo.
Yes.
It's you all mentioned that character, and from what I've heard, the new Hellraiser film, I've heard Jamie Clayton does a very good version. I assume it's meant to be another Cenobite, but it looks very similar. She's meant to do a very good portrayal, but I haven't seen it because Disney, get your acting gear, still haven't sorted out the international distribution. So I can't comment on her performance, but Doug Bradley, I mean, he has been replaced a few times in the sequels, but whenever you mention that character, it will always be Doug Bradley that people's minds go to, because it was just something. It has a little bit of everything in his performance, and I'm not saying another actor couldn't have done as well, if not better. Maybe they could have, but like Harrison Ford, you can't imagine, like, nobody has yet bettered him. And again, I say that without the benefit of seeing the newest performance, but Doug Bradley will always be the hell priest for a lot of people, and deservedly so. But I mean, again, it's in the sit-in, especially in the third one, I will say. I know we're not meant to be, but he has some great lines as just a statue. And it emphasizes what he does in this film, where he doesn't come after you. He just stands there. And he's got all that Freddy Krueger stuff going on. And you don't want to be near him. He's got the same effect on you as like the alien does in the original film when it's facing off against Lambert. She doesn't want to touch it. Kirsty doesn't want to touch him, and she's being forced to touch Chatterer's fingers. Again, a lot of sexual subtext throughout the film. But Doug Bradley just this is another thing of the era people need to keep in mind, that horror films were getting a bit comical at this time. You had you had Freddy Krueger and that, but they were starting to become like parodies kind of thing. The Evil Dead films, that kind of thing. This film returned horror to being played straight down the line. And it brought you back to, if you did a stage production, although his voice had to do some modulation in post-production, you could have had Doug Bradley do it on stage, and it would have been a chilling stage performance. He wouldn't have needed to have the special effects in the camera because there aren't any. It's just him in a costume. Apparently he fell over a few times because he couldn't see his marks on the floor. And he had black contact lenses. But he just followed that advice from Clive Barker. Do less. and by doing less, he gave us more. And it's one of those performances you can go back to countless times on YouTube clips, and you can learn a little bit of something new almost every time you see it. And that also goes for, the female, to some degree, Chatterer, and even Butterball. There are certain things Butterball does, just like just the timing of certain things, but all that, unfortunately, he just mostly stands there. So no disrespect to the actor, but the actor wasn't given opportunities sufficient. But especially with Doug Bradley's performance, you just get that chef's kiss thing. It's Christopher Lee as Dracula. And when you hear that when he was doing this, he had to choose between the lead Cenobite or the removal guy. And he thought, oh, well, maybe I should be the removal guy because my face is going to be covered in latex. I need the exposure for my acting career. If he'd chosen the removal guy and not lead Cenobite, he realizes since then that, he dodged a bullet. But that was, if fate had gone a different way, it could have been a very different film. Which is ironic because the film is not about the Cenobites, it's about Frank and Julia. They are the real villains in it, but
that's what people remembered, was this visual, especially
absolutely.
Pinhead. Now, I've seen the new film.
Capture the imagination.
And she's fine, but she's not Doug Bradley. She looks good in makeup, but it wouldn't be... for some reason, it's not lightning in the bottle like Doug.
So you don't get the sense of presence that Bradley gave, if I'm assuming, right? Because that's what I always come back to. He had this sense of presence. It melts through the screen. It's magic. I mean, it's grotesque, it's horrific, and he's promising nothing but unpleasantness. But it's whatever the horror version of charisma is. It's that. It's amazing.
It's if you look at Arnold Schwarzenegger, it's what separated him from a million other bodybuilders that were trying to get into action. He had a certain look about him, a certain stare, a certain core of radioactivity that just emanated on screen. Every time he just stared, he looked. And Doug Bradley has this look that just so far can't be duplicated. And that's why it became so iconic. And as we move forward here, I don't know about you, but I was rather annoyed when I first saw this movie decades ago because Pinhead was hardly in this movie.
A lot of people have that reaction, yeah.
Yeah, now I was too young to watch it in theaters when it came out in 1987. But I saw the poster, I saw that VHS cover. I saw the newspaper and magazine ads, and there was Pinhead up front and center. Yeah. And when I eventually could sit down and watch the film, I was excited because I thought this movie would follow form of other iconic horror characters, and the focus would be on this visually stunning being with nails in his head. And I thought we were getting
because you're thinking like, oh, he's like the shark in Jaws. This is the character. But it's hardly anything. I mean, I remember years, all I knew about Hellraiser was whenever I went to the video rental store, they had like a poster, and 7 out of 10 times one of them had one of Hellraiser, and it was Pinhead holding the box, and he had this menacing glare. But yeah, if you watch this for Cenobites, keep your expectations.
I thought we were getting another Freddy Krueger here. I thought we were getting another Jason Voorhees, another iconic horror villain that will dominate the runtime. But as you said, instead, Pinhead was hardly in the movie, and the spotlight was instead placed upon this married couple, Larry and Julia, played by Andrew Robinson and Clara Higgins. And then later on, Christy, Larry's daughter, played by Ashley Lawrence, as they move into...
Yeah. I think Kirsty has been in one of the sequels as well, but I don't remember much of it.
I think she was in the second one. She was in a mental hospital.
Oh, yeah. I mean, like one of the far later sequels as well. Yeah,
I see.
yeah.
I
She
see.
came. It was reprised by Ashley Lawrence in that as well. But yeah, so Kirsty has also eventually became as synonymous with Hellraiser as Pinhead to an extent. But yeah.
So the film really focused on this family melodrama rather than Pinhead. So my initial viewing, I wasn't getting what I was expecting. And actually, for my first time, I recall not even finishing the movie. It was only
Yeah.
later, with no expectation and probably an adult craving for subtext and deeper
Yes.
meaning, could I appreciate Pinhead and the other Cenobites. And I could appreciate that they were not the villains of the movie, but rather these horrible people were. You know, Frank and
Yeah.
Julia were the villains. And it makes this movie so much more interesting because of it.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah. It's. I remember I looked at because a lot of the DVDs I have, I just keep the receipts in them just because they're there. I realised, this came from 2004. So 2004 was when I saw the first three Hellraiser films. It was like a box set of them. But I remember watching it, and I think to myself, no, screw it. I'm going to see what this film poster was about. Show me. I want to know. And it felt like an art house film.
yeah,
It doesn't feel like what you expect to see when all you've seen is image after image after image of Pinhead and this box and the light coming out of it and chained hooks. And I remember seeing like a behind the scenes on a talk show thing, and they showed you how the resurrection scene of Frank, how that was done, and I thought, oh wow, because this is like a landmark for special effects. Okay, so this must be really full on. This must be like Ridley Scott's Legend. And a lot of it's very human drama, and you're not keyed up for human things. This is very much when you talk about the hero quest cycle, and they talk about like the heroes, like their domestic world, and they have to break out of it. The whole film is practically set. It's more about the hero's inner world, things coming into their world rather than them breaking out of it.
yeah,
So you have to be prepared for something very art house like. It's not about the Cenobites. It's not really even about the box. Those aren't incidental. But again, it's about masks with people put on. It's about allegories. It's about the box is as much a gateway as other things are. Corruption is a gateway. Things towards corruption are gateways. A lot of it is about gateways opening and trying to close gateways, what corruption can do, how someone can immerse themselves into that sort of quicksand of not even hedonistic, but they think they're doing the right thing, and then they're in too deep to get out of it, and then they become part of the whole thing. It's very much about it. You just get this feeling of sticky oil over everyone.
yeah,
And the other thing about it is Kirsty is not what is typically referred to as a final girl. It's implied she's not a virgin. She fights back. She doesn't. She has opportunities to. There's subtext about reaching out to Christian symbology, but she says, no, I'm going to fight this on my own terms. I'm going to strike a deal, and I'm going to try and screw over those who would trap me. And it very much is about subverting expectations. And if you're not prepared for it, it can subvert your expectations to, like you said, you might stop and watch. I'm not going to watch this film anymore. But it's not that kind of film. It's the kind of film where you have to wait, and it will reward you with payoff.
yeah,
And a lot of it is about an examination of the human condition. And sometimes it will use a lot of gore and special effects to achieve that purpose. But it's not gore for the sake of gore. A lot of it is there's a reason for murder or whatever it is, because it's about a character's journey to doing something, or it's about why they're doing it or how they're doing it. It's not like a splatter porn film, which you can get a misleading impression if you watch, like, let's see a Hellraiser YouTube video, and typically it will be about blood and creatures and that. This is not that. And this is, weirdly, mostly about a marriage breaking down that has never, it was kind of almost semi-lifeless from the beginning, and about what would have happened if Julia had never met Frank, blah, blah, blah. But it's very much human villains, and it's all this stuff is not incidental, but you can be forgiving for coming to the conclusion, where's my Cenobites, where's my Pinhead? Because they're not there. They're in the background.
Yeah, and I feel for Larry here, as they were saying they were leaving Brooklyn and moving into Larry's dead mother's home in a more, as we were talking about before, familiar area for Julia, wherever that is. But you could tell he hopes this move might repair the marriage, right? The problems in their marriage.
Yeah, I think he says we can make it work, which you can take that way. Or because he immediately then says about, oh, well, I can get a job here, blah, blah. So you could also interpret it like financially they can make it work. But as it goes on, you get more of a feeling that Julia is dissatisfied with their marriage than he is. He seems a little more oblivious to the extent of how she's been desensitized to it. Like Frank has been desensitized to pleasure and pain right at the start.
Well, it shows to me that Larry is the only one trying. And I go back to just this real quick moment that you could even miss is as they're walking in and are saying, hey, we can live here and hey, we can make this work. She drops her cigarette in the house and stomps it with her shoe to put it out inside the the foyer, right? Of the home.
She's shitting the bed, basically. Like animals don't do that. They go outside to do their business, and like they're saying she's outside, she's putting on this persona of this very sort of socialite, dignified woman, and we can make a go of it. And then she does this very bitchy, animalistic thing, and it's almost like she's marking her territory in a way. But she's doing it very passive-aggressively. Yeah. But she's doing it in such a way that he doesn't necessarily even notice she's done that with a cigarette. He's just responding to her behavior.
Yeah, or maybe he's just whipped. But I tell you,
in the script, it does describe it. I think it gives a description, and then he says, but there's a corner of him that is utterly defeated. So it's like he's been worn down prior to this. But and later on, there's a scene where he's watching a boxing match from the TV, and it goes to the heart of he wants to get in the ring, but he would never actually put himself in the ring. So he's been subjected to her passive-aggressive treatment for a while now. But he's trying. He's like you said, he's trying to mend things. He just doesn't know how.
Oh, you could tell. And even Kirsty, his daughter from a previous marriage, doesn't like her new stepmother, and rightly so, because it's clear to me as I'm watching this that Julia doesn't love her husband, Larry, and perhaps she never did. But she's just pretending and still fixated on Larry's brother, Frank, who she actually had sex with on her wedding day, on her wedding dress.
Yes.
I mean,
and as she climaxes, you see a close up of her hand gripping the bridal gown. It's really, it's really nailing it home, no pun intended, about just by doing that, they are making a mockery of her wedding vows to be. But this is another message of the film, because a lot of it is about paying a price. And just prior to them having sex in that scene, like Frank has to pay a price when he opens the box. I think she says, what about Larry, or something like that. And he says, forget him. That is the price Julia has to pay. She has to forget Larry to open up that gateway to pleasure. And she had, like, there's this old joke that goes around, like, about Back to the Future, where Lorraine, Marty's mother, what kind of woman did she become when she was older? Because when you go back into the part, he goes back in time and you realize Lorraine is kind of weirdly turned on by danger in some ways. And you've got a similar thing happening here with Julia, even down to he's got like a switchblade and she does that sort of thing. And he cuts open the shoulder. But they in interviews, they said they made it clear this is not a rape. She is into they are on the same road sensually, but in the aftermath of sex, she's, you know, they're just laying there in this post-orgasmic thing, and he's doing this foreshadowing thing of saying it's never enough. But she's saying to him, "I'll do anything, anything you want. Tell me, I'll do anything." And it's later on. It comes back to that logic, like he's subtly reminding her she said she'd do anything, which leads her down her own path of corruption. But yeah, you do wonder, what if Frank had never met her? Because when he meets her, she says, "Yes, I'm really happy." He leads her. He does the bad boy thing. Yeah. He gives her a taste of, well, what's it like, but. You know, he's not the kind of guy a girl would take back to her folks. He's just not. He's an absolute hedonist, but he knows how to get into her panties. And you get the sense Larry doesn't, but Larry tries to be emotionally supportive. But for a woman like Julia, that's never enough. But she's never met anyone like Frank. Or if they have, they've never tried taking advantage. But she's like, I've never experienced this. Give me more. Frank is Julia's drug. And that's why you get that.
But you know, she's
a drug addict.
This is going to be deserving of a curse. But on their wedding day, on a wedding dress with her brother, I mean, wow, what a fucking awful wife! What a fucking awful brother!
Yes.
And these two humans are just plain awful people. But what you're getting into, actually, is where the root of the film begins to show itself and become clear to me, and touches upon my title of my essay, which was a cautionary tale. Because, at least in my interpretation, you know, the pictures that Julia finds depicting Frank having sex with women, possibly more than one, but it depicts all different forms of taboo debauchery, especially what was considered taboo in the conservative and religious 1980s. Yeah. And here is Frank, a deviant. He is a deviant. One picture shows Frank with a naked woman performing fellatio on him as her wrists are bound in bondage behind her. A second picture has a topless woman with her face entirely covered by a mask.
You get a kind of wonder, were they trying an occult thing? Because it looks like it's some sort of ceremonial mask.
So I think he was trying everything, because another pic here shows him having sex while he's pulling her hair from behind.
Yeah.
And then
it looks quite aggressive.
Yeah. And then you compile this with flashbacks of Julia's encounter with Frank on her wedding day, where Frank, as you were talking before, pulls out a switchblade close to Julia's neck, then cuts her clothing with it. And it's stacked upon his willingness to explore a semi-incestuous nature with his soon-to-be sister-in-law, and not to mention his sexual interest in his brother's daughter, Kirsty, shown later in the film. Yeah. And this, to me, is the crux of what I take from this film and why I call it a cautionary tale, because the subtext comes across to me that Hellraiser is a warning about escalation. It could easily be about drugs instead of sex, where some people feel the need to keep chasing a higher high as they cycle through more powerful and
Chasing the
subsequent
dragon.
dangerous drugs. Yeah, chasing the dragon. Or it's just people just trying to achieve an equal high because the stuff they previously were on is no longer having the same effect it did before. But here it seems to be all about what clinical psychiatrists, I believe, call sexual deviant behavior, where people feel a more powerful sexual arousal to atypical objects, to atypical fantasies and situations. But with some, apparently, these atypical acts lose their potency.
Mm-hmm.
They lose their potency in time, and these people feel the need to escalate whatever behavior they're into and double down because their previous behaviors are just not doing it for them
Yeah.
anymore.
Yeah.
It's not creating that same level of excitement. And I think that's happening with Frank here. It's a rabbit hole for him. You know, through flashbacks, we see that Frank's unsatisfied. Even after that taboo act of pulling a knife on a woman he's about to have sex with, his soon to be sister in law on her wedding day, after that taboo, we still see Frank naked in bed complaining to Julia that it is never enough, as you said.
And he looks disappointed when he says it.
Yeah, he
It's like
seems.
he's achieved orgasm. He's done the dirty deed. He's done what he set out to do. But it's like, no, it is.
He seems frustrated that it wasn't as pleasing
Yeah.
as he had hoped. It's never enough, and that's why he's pursuing the puzzle box. He's consumed by it now, finding that next fixed.
Well, also, you have to wonder, would he have gone after Julia? Would he have tried to seduce her if she wasn't getting married to his brother? That might have played if it wasn't for her about to be getting married to her brother. That's the taboo that draws him in. If she was just another woman, maybe he'd have had sex with her, but he wouldn't have deliberately set out to do it in the way he did. And right from the start, you're talking about like a drug addiction. Very much with Julia, there's this kind of Stockholm syndroming, because right from the start, he gets very emotionally abusive.
Yeah.
And he starts ordering her about that. That's Frank has this hold over her, and he knows it even later on. But even the talk about like the wedding vows later on, it echoes back to that, because when you have the resurrected Frank and he's becoming whole again, there is a scene where they're holding hands and they do this obscene mockery of wedding vows, and it's you know, for better or worse, you're in this. And he says, it's like love, except it's real, which tells you a hell of a lot about Frank's perspective. He's never experienced love, which in turn makes you think, did he have an abusive childhood? Well, not abusive, because clearly Larry's okay, but was Larry the one that was given the parent, like, did he have the parental affection, whereas Frank didn't get that? Or at least if he did he not psychologically, was he a psychopath in terms of he wasn't able to process that love? And because he can't get love, he's just chasing the next high, the next sensual high, because that's the closest he can get to it.
It might have not been environmental. I mean, I don't know why some people can drink alcohol in excess with no risk of addiction, and then others find it highly addictive. And just like some are angry drunks and some are happy drunks, and sometimes it's not environment. And I don't know why this escalation occurs within some people, and we even hear it happen with criminals, where peeping toms and flashers seem to increase their daringness within time. And, it's much like Julia, who has pushed herself further into depths of depravity, not just by having kinky sex with her husband's brother, but now sinking to murder, in where watching the sport of boxing used to make her sick. But now it doesn't even faze her.
No, because she herself has indulged in what she said, I've seen worse. And you're thinking, yeah, you've personally been responsible for worse by that point.
So now it has no effect on her like it used to before. So
But
that's my theme.
You have to remember, at the
escalation.
start, you get the sense she is, from Julia's perspective, she is trapped in a loveless marriage.
Yeah.
And she must feel like it's draining her. But it's because she's not willing to put the effort in. Or if she has, she gave up a long time ago. Larry's trying to do that. This is a couple who badly need counselling. But she is, and women like that, unfortunately, they are very vulnerable to people like Frank.
But Eric, I'm not even convinced she ever loved him, because that happened on their wedding day. Now, it's true, some people get caught up and get married and realize they've made a big mistake, but I'm not convinced here. I'm not convinced Julia was ever in love, because how easy she gave up to Frank. It's possible that she did it out of convenience or financial means, or just not wanting to be alone, and there was never an actual love bond between them. And maybe her daughter, his daughter, Kirsty, could see that right from the beginning, but he couldn't. He's blind to it. I don't know.
I mean, she says later on, Frank says, you can't love him. And she says, no, I don't love him. But by that point, they've already reignited the flame between them.
Yeah.
So you wonder, well, again, perhaps she did love Larry early on. And it's just Frank's come in like a bulldozer. He is not someone she's been prepared for ever in her life. She's repressed herself so far down that he can exploit things about her. And he's the kind of guy who, of course, he won't give up. So maybe she did try saying no initially, but he knew what buttons to press, because he's probably met women like Julia before, because he's that kind of guy and he knows how to play her like a violin. And she's not, but by the time he's given her that taste, she's, oh no, I want more. She's little orphan Oliver Moore, sir, please can I have another?
Well, I might be naive, but I do believe there has to be something in her to do that on her wedding day in regards to it's not just Frank.
Oh yeah,
Frank is not culpable. That she.
But you get the sense they've already been having an affair already. It's just that they also did it on her wedding day. I think they'd already had sex before that.
Oh. So I wasn't sure about that.
I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but that's where I got the sense like that was the culmination. And then like he went away or something, and that's why she's been pining for it ever since. But I got the sense that wasn't the only time that's why her feelings, because it took root in her. They've had this fling, and it gave her something she has not found anywhere else, whatever it was, but it was prolonged for a period of time. I haven't read the novella, unfortunately, so I can't say whether that happened, but that's my impression.
Right. All right, so as Julie is fantasizing about her previous sexual encounter with her husband's brother, her husband Larry is moving a mattress upstairs. And Larry gashes his hand on a nail just as she comes to an orgasm in her sexual recollection with Frank. And
that wasn't what made her orgasm, of course. It was
no, but it's seemingly, at least to me, introducing or interjecting finally this idea. If we haven't seen it from the outfits of the Cenobites already, they're introducing the idea of S&M. And look, I know some researchers have hypothesized that both pleasure and pain share the same neurochemical pathways. And there is a connection between the two, which is interesting here to me, because that also provides a through line to the Cenobites, and where they say they are demons to some, angels to others, because because by default, Eric, we believe that good people provide pleasure and the villains provide pain, the bad people. But what is so fascinating about these beings, these Cenobites, as you were saying before, is, or at least to me, is they are not really evil. And they refer to themselves as explorers of the further regions of experience. And those further regions seem to be reinforcing that pleasure and pain have this connective tissue. And it's just so interesting to me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the other thing about that scene where he has that gash in the hand is that it reinforces. I mean, I was saying about masks and stuff. There is also this thread throughout the story about blood, and it's very like blood resurrects Frank. Although in the book it was he'd masturbated on the floor, I think, as part of the ritual, so it was semen as well. But in the film, it's blood which resurrects Frank. Blood is about family, and in the original novella, Clive Barker called it the Books of Blood, and he's got this quote where he said, "We are all books. Wherever we're opened, we're read," which is a neat little play on words. But blood is very much all part through this film, and like you say, yeah, there is this thing about pain and pleasure because you have Julia having this sort of orgasmic, very much an erotic trip down memory lane, and she's having like Frank is pounding into her and it's making her and she's remembering this high, the orgasmic height she's reached, and you hear you got Larry and the removal guys going with this couch, and it's a great little segue just as a filmmaking device. It's great, but it's very, very visceral, and also you do see his hand getting closer and closer to this really jagged nail that's out, and you are kind of going, no, I know it's going to happen. I don't want to see it, because it is making you're almost feeling it on your hand, because you know what that's going to feel like if you. But yeah, you do have that pain and pleasure thing.
Yeah, it's like, in a sexual way. Here it comes.
They're already messaging the audience. Yeah.
Yeah, and in an orgasm way. Here it comes. To a painful way. You're cringing. The nail. Here it comes. And it's and it's two sides of one coin. It feels like, or at least how it's being presented in this film, and it's so fascinating. But as you said,
for Julia to escape her loveless marriage, she has to spill blood, but by spilling blood, that's the start of her path to death. And of course, earlier on in the film, you will see like the religious statues outside. And what's interesting is that they're also inside the residence, which is where Frank was, which implies, did he keep them there? Because he actually like puts Christmas tree lights around them. Did he have them there as in the hope that they would protect him as well? But every so often, there's this. I think this is one of the only horror films where there's a Jesus Christ is responsible for a jump scare. There's a statue of Jesus Christ that comes out. But you do have a lot of these interesting little subtext things that if you blink, you miss it. And it's the same here with this nail. And of course, what is a nail? It's a long, phallic, hard object that wants to penetrate. There's a lot in this film about penetration, whether it's penetration of the mind, whether it's the Hell Priest with nails, dozens and dozens of penetrating into his skull, whether it's Frank trying to sexually penetrate, or he gets out the switchblade and he wants to penetrate you, which would be a very short pathway to death. There's a lot in the film about penetration and sexuality. This is not a film wherein for a teenager you want to say, Mum, Dad, let's watch Hellraiser together, because it's going to be really uncomfortable viewing if you do that.
Yeah, this is not for the kiddies, even the older kiddies.
I mean, teenagers, they'll get it, but don't watch this with your parents or anyone you're going to feel uncomfortable with watching.
I'm not sure if teenagers will get it, though. You know what I mean? I mean, I
think they'll get some of it. They would.
Yeah, but I think a lot of it, they'll just hover around the surface level and never get into the deeper stuff until they become an adult. At least that's what happened with me. But, well, regardless, so Julia Larry runs up to her, bleeding from his wound, walks into the attic,
Yes.
and the blood drips into the floorboards in the process. And Julia leads him back downstairs to the hospital to get stitches. And the blood of Larry is sucked through the floorboards. And it seems to regenerate the heart of Frank, which actually looks like a little plastic baggie that is being filled with air.
I think it probably was on set. It's interesting because you can see it looked as though everything had been vanished at the start, but you realise some of Frank's remains were clearly just under the floorboards. Because you just go, it's a very nice shot where you just go. It's like when you have those over the water and under the water shots. Kind of, it's that, but with floorboards. And and then you do see it starting to move. And I mean, is it his heart or is it lungs? We don't know. It's some sort of internal that starts inflating, and that. But of course, that's how you know. Some people say, "Oh, well, Frank's undead or he's dead." No, he's actually literally been resurrected into life. His body is functioning again. It's just
the Cenobites basically need a better cleaning crew, right? When they clean up a room, you got to realize sometimes it penetrates the floorboards.
Yeah.
But well, regardless, then what we are treated to, and I will say treated to, is underline that word, is a stunning scene of practical effects wizardry. You know, something that I've never seen before in film, and maybe haven't since, where a body is regenerated before our very eyes.
And usually in horror films, it's about tearing bodies apart, which happens in the film. Yes. But this is this I think goes back to the heart of one of Clive Barker's earliest influences. Is that I forgot what it's called, but it's Vena Atomica. It's those old anatomical sketches of the human body and body parts, which fascinated him in childhood, I think it was. And this is very much a three-dimensional realization of that book. I don't think it was done to this extent. In fact, I think, if memory serves right, I think originally they planned they were just going to see the blood go into the floorboards, and then they were going to show later on Frank was there. And they were given some money for doing some extra reshoots and stuff, and they put this into it. And this is actually, it's a really extended money shot, and it is one of those things where it's not about the Cenobites again, but it is something where you can't take your eyes off of, because it's not like a Marvel film. You're seeing bones grow out of there. You're seeing flesh, cellular animations. It's fascinating. So, and this is the kind of thing like a teenage boy would look at and they go, "Oh, cool! I want to watch more of that."
Yeah.
But it's not these days. You can tell it's fake by today's standards, but it's still really well done for the time.
Yes. And you know what was really interesting, and this is probably, I don't know at what stage of Frank's regeneration Clive Barker wanted this, but I had learned a couple years ago, I believe it was, that Clive Barker did not want Pinhead on the movie posters, that he wanted Frank on the movie posters. Now, I don't know if it was in this form or in the, maybe in that white shirt, and he has this, skinless head. I'm not sure.
Probably that would have been a nice juxtaposition, because it would make you go, "Wow, it's not a zombie film. It's someone dressed in a suit, sort of thing." I mean, we don't know, but it wouldn't surprise me.
But I guess because of regulations and stuff like that, they didn't allow it, so he was forced to put Pinhead on that cover, and and the rest is history. But you're right, it's a wonderful scene, and it's a beautiful artistry and practical effects, and you know what, I would be remiss not to mention the fantastic score by composer Christopher Young, who did a brilliant job creating this soundtrack. And from this,
it's one of my favorites. I've got the soundtrack to all the 3 films. It's a superb bit of orchestral
Yeah,
symphony stuff.
and this regeneration scene, this music
It
feels
elevates it beyond what it would have otherwise been. It's got this whole sumptuous. It makes it. I mean, it's just full of gore, but it's like a waltz. It turns it into a journey. It's really you can't quite describe it, but it feels like this is Hell's version of Birth.
to me, it's like fairy tale music out of a Tim Burton movie, and it doesn't feel like it's suited for a scene.
And yet
like
it works.
Yeah, it works, and
It
works.
shouldn't work, but it does. It works so well.
Yep. And throughout this whole movie, he just did a fantastic job. Like those creepy bell rings.
Yeah, the death knells. Yeah.
Yeah, and then to the iconic Hellraiser theme that we hear during the opening credits and throughout. It's so memorable. It's so good. So I love it. So later that night, Julia shortly excuses herself from a party after watching. It looked like jealousy, it seems to me, when she was watching.
Did you notice Kirsty has a really weird reaction to her boyfriend? And he just does this really cheap and tacky trick with putting a cigarette or something. He just like turns it over in his mouth, and she's getting all really hot for it. And I think, what? You need to get out more, love. It's really strange. She's really into it. So I don't know if something was cut out there, because it feels like she should have just gone like a little flirtatious sort of thing. You're doing something oral. But she's really into it.
Well, if you remember, also, Kirsty was really drunk. As she's walking down the hallway, she's trying to balance herself. But Julia, to me, looked like she was actually jealous with the situation, which makes sense because it seemed like she heads upstairs to have more memories of her tryst with Frank.
Well, they're all couples. Even Kirsty is getting on with her couple, and she is there with her significant other, but she's feeling nothing for him. So she's feeling left out. But the one she feels can complete her is... I think she's got a sense, because she keeps just going back in her mind. Everything because it's mainly the photograph, probably. Because that's reminded her what he looks like, and she just steals it for her own little collection. And it's... But it's reminded her how lonely she feels inside, I think.
Yeah. And, I don't know if it was done on purpose, but there is, all the couples are sitting together, and there is some separation at the two heads of the table.
Yes.
There's Julia on one side, and there's Larry on the other. And so she heads upstairs, and then she's scared out of her mind because Julia finds a gory portion of a man grabbing her and holding the door closed, barking, "Don't look at me." He's
got no legs at this point. He's just sort of like crawls out along the floor, so you don't know if it's an animal. And it's really nicely done in shadow. It's quite startling when he just rushes out like that, because you kind of think, I would react just like Julia.
Oh yeah, I would too. And but that creature, reveals to Julia that it's her love, Larry's brother, Frank, and the blood of Larry.
And it's not quick. She doesn't realize it at first. It takes her a while to twig it's him.
Well, she says, "Who are you?" You know? And I think he says something like, "Don't you recognize me?" No, he doesn't say that, but I don't know.
She should be like, "No, I don't."
But so he reveals to her that he is Frank, and that he needs more blood so he can become fully human again, so they can be together. And then after some initial...
And it's not like a quick thing. He does explain, well, my brother's blood brought me back, so therefore. So he does convey the logic of it. So Julia isn't going from 0 to 100 miles an hour murderer style. She's being filled in on that's the logic for how he's got resurrected. Therefore, it's the only way she can figure out how to remedy the situation. But she doesn't want to do that at first. She does. She's got no intention of being a murderer, but.
Yeah, definitely don't push my or me pushing through the story as a speedy reluctance.
Yeah.
Like, okay, I'll do it.
Yeah,
instantaneously.
there is a journey. It's
Yeah.
believable the way it happens because she's already enmeshed. She's already recollecting, and this is like giving her the final nudge. And it goes back to the dynamic they had on the first day where he does get passive aggressive and bitchy with her and you can get that vibe of him ordering her about, and she Stockholm syndromes it a little bit even now. So they do the performances with Claire Higgins and I think it's a different guy in the skin suit to Sean Chapman, I think. But their dynamic in those scenes, they sell it really well performance-wise. It's not just a conventional kill for me, okay, I'll kill for you thing. It's a very human reaction if they're hedonists that have got this addiction, and it's just sort of like the oven has been heated up again on it, as it were.
Right. So this begins from the bar to the home, Julia's downward descent of luring lonely men from bars to her house for an afternoon of sexual delight.
Which she's not initially very... And she comes across really awkward on her first go. So it's clearly... You get the sense she might have been lonely in the marriage, but she hasn't been going out to other men. It would probably only been Frank. And since he's out of the picture, she's not been with any other guys ever since. Because she's like, there's a guy that chats her up, and she's like, oh, yeah, I suppose so. Ha 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 ha. She does that sort of like, oh, that's a very nice blouse you've got on, sort of awkwardness to it. But she's letting him do all the work. And it's not very slick at all.
Well, I think also that awkwardness comes from nervousness that you're actually going to be taking this man back to your house to kill him.
Yeah.
And as far as we know, she's never murdered anyone before. But what these unsuspecting men, starting with this first man, gets is a hammer to the head. And
in the book, it was a knife. They changed it to a hammer in the film, so in a way it's more brutal.
It is more brutal, and it takes a few hits and until he gets him like square on the forehead, and then it's followed by Frank's fingers like penetrating their bodies.
Yeah, it's not made clear the process, but it's like he's basically like a flesh vampire.
Yeah, it's like not just sucking. At first, I thought they needed blood based on what happened with...
Because you hear this sucking noise, but it's not the camera is on her face throughout it. Which it's one of these things where Hellraiser is not glorifying the moment. It's on her reaction to what she's witnessing. And Frank's even telling her, don't look at me, that this isn't for you. Which is interesting because later on you get the Cenobites telling Kirsty this isn't for your eyes when they do their thing as well. So it's a kind of foreshadowing.
I just took it as it's draining their essence, their life force.
But it's a lot like the Mummy films of old, because after it's done they look very much like dried husks, like in the old Mummy films.
Well, actually, if you've seen that space vampire movie, Life Force, I think it's like that too. Yeah, they used to train, they were like space vampires, but they would, once these aliens were done with these bodies, these alien vampires, they looked like shrinked, decrepit, puppets.
Desiccated, yeah.
Yeah, so...
and of course here, the other thing that needs to be pointed out is that at this point, Julia is talking herself into it in the belief it's just one guy. That's all it needs. Just one victim, and that'll be it. She doesn't realise it's going to need more. That Frank doesn't know it needs more, but once they start down that path, so it's not like she goes, "I'm going to commit mass murder." Yeah, she thinks, right, I'm good, just the one. That's it. I don't have to do any more. But she
And I
doesn't know.
guess and I guess she's just putting these bodies in the closet because later on in the movie, when
Yes.
Kirsty is hiding, we see one of the bodies, one of those jump scares,
Maggots, yeah.
yeah, pops out and maggots are like coming out of and it is a scary scene. I'll give it that, but I
It
guess
is, yeah.
it's not smelling up the house in any way. I
That's the
don't know.
one thing I remember thinking on my first ever viewing. I was thinking, even if it was just Frank, let alone a body that's been had that process, and let alone several of them, even if it was just Frank up there, there should be a real stench of, and people say human flesh is meant to be a really unforgettable scent.
Yeah.
That should be really filling up the house. So you have to put it down to, well, maybe Frank's been to hell and there's been these weird magical force fields that's not letting you smell it. That's the only weird sort of... She's hiding the bodies, but realistically, Larry should be going, darling, have you been putting some meat up there? There's nothing like that.
Well, if you went as far as the Frank was training the life force to the degree that these bodies were unable to decay because everything was drained from these bodies, I could go with that. But then why would the maggots be there? There's got to be some sort of process.
But also just him, his body. It's like initially.
Well, his body as well. You're right. Yeah.
Even if you had somebody that's alive somehow and they're under anesthetic and they've been flayed, you would probably smell odors, I would think.
Yep. All right. So during this time, and let's just box this all together here, Kirsty appears to be stalked by this creepy, dirty bearded, like maybe homeless man on the street, and at her job, at her veterinarian job, and not veterinarian, pet store, excuse me.
Yeah,
and
pet store.
Knowing what this homeless man transforms into in the end, this winged skeletal creature that flees with the puzzle box at this point, I don't know why this drifter is tied to Christy, so to speak. That is haunting Christy, so to speak. Now, she hasn't interacted with the Cenobites yet, nor the puzzle box, unless it's back to what the merchant in Morocco said, that this box is always Frank's, and maybe this box is somehow always Christie's too, tied to her in some way.
It's never made clear. You have to come up with your own theories. I personally, I was rewatching it literally just before we did this recording, and I think probably he's one of those entities which gets you heard that there's something like an air of death around someone. Probably anyone that's got a destiny to do with the puzzle box, he gets a sense of and he's attracted to. Or it could also be she is a blood relative of Frank. So it could be he's picking up on her scent or something. She is sharing a bloodline, but of course at that point the Cenobites and that they don't know Frank's gone, so maybe it's not that. But I mean, there are connections with Kirsty. Kirsty does have a destiny with the puzzle box. In fact, she literally opens it at one point. But she has also got a link with Frank, so I think it's one of those elements that Clive Barker probably planned to do something with, and it wasn't fleshed out. I don't know. I mean, again, might have been something that's fleshed out more in the book. I don't know. I haven't read the book. But yeah, I agree with that. It does feel kind of out of place, and it's like you're waiting for something to happen with this character, and he doesn't really come into the story. He is literally a walking plot device, and he just comes into it later, gets the puzzle box, and goes away. It's and eats insects.
Well, yeah, that that I
Which,
can't
I mean, in
explain.
fairness, that does go back because when they first enter the house, Larry notices there's a lot of like rotting food and there's maggots and cockroaches and stuff over the food that Frank's left there. So I think that's meant to be a subtext through line. It goes back to Frank with the insects, but it's to do with rotting and decayed things. And
Yeah, you know, I in my head canon, at some point in time, was always thinking that maybe the merchant and this bearded guy was the same entity,
he
that it
might
was
be, yeah,
some sort of shapeshifter, but
could be.
but I then can't go forward and explain like what would be the purpose of eating bugs in front of Kirsty, other just to creep
Maybe
her
it's just
out.
maybe it's simple as that. Maybe it feeds off fear and it's making her disgusted and go, oh, like even just the presence of he's not a little guy, he's a bulky guy and he's a homeless guy and she's there on her own. That in itself, it's intimidation. So you could say
Yeah.
in that regard, it's creating fear. But I mean, I get the sense he's attracted to something about. He knows something. He knows something's up. But unfortunately, the film never really explores what or why he's there. So you just
I have a
it's
feeling
one of
the
those things.
I have a feeling the explanation is a lot less glamorous. Like they
Yeah,
probably did it because it was creepy. You know, I mean,
yeah,
you know how
probably.
sometimes we invent these big explanations
Yeah,
with masculinity and this issue
yeah.
and this subtext and
That's
then
that's
the
what apparently Clive Barker at some conventions back in the day he used to go. It's a story about a guy with nails in his head. Get over it, sort of thing. Because he never understood why it got like the level of. He knew it would be he was aiming to do a good film, but he never understood why it got the sheer magnitude of a
Mm,
cult following that it did. So is I think Clive Barker himself he's kind of a little bit bemused by what people read into it, maybe. But yeah,
yeah.
I think it is just one of those horror elements that we don't know, so we have to leave it at that. Homeless guy who eats creepy crawlies, and yeah,
Yep. So
and
there
he's
were,
also a winged demon in his spare time.
yeah, yeah,
See, that guy would be an actual demon.
yeah.
Whereas when I put in my thing like angelic butchery, I was going back to that line that the Cenobites use later on, angels to some, demons to others, because
Mm,
that is, when we come on to that, I mean, that encapsulates Cenobites. They are not demons, they are something else.
right. They have some sort of, to me, almost a neutrality about
Yeah,
them.
that's very much like they're batting for hell, but they don't care one way or the other necessarily about. They've got rules to go by, and they are restricted by those rules, but they like
Or
their playtime too.
or perhaps they're even beyond good and evil. You know, that it's just on a level that we can't comprehend.
Yeah, I
Y-
mean, they would see it like that. They clearly are evil. They're on the side of evil. They are literally working for hell, but
Well,
they're not like I want to kill a load of people. They are on another level. That's not where their interest is.
see,
They are objective.
in just the context of this film, I will push back on that I never
Yeah.
got a impression that they were working for hell or had agents of hell. And even when Kirsty
Well, there is
later
the dialogue from the female where Kirsty says "Go to hell," and the female says "We can't.
said we
We can't
can't
not
someone,
without taking someone back." So they have come from hell. It makes it clear they have come from hell.
that gave me impression they could go to hell.
It says
But
"Go to hell." We can't. We can't go
meaning
back without.
without taking someone.
Yeah, because
But
they've been summoned. That's what the puzzle box does. Yeah. And of course, when she first opens the puzzle box, it doesn't summon them. It opens the wall and it takes her into this very hellscape place where the engineer is. It is not. And
well,
Frank makes it clear where he goes is not a good place.
it's certainly not
Somewhere.
fire and brimstone, but I
No, it's
still
it's not a Christian version of hell. It's other.
but it's never my impression, and this is just my impression, that they are birthed out of hell. They can't, not necessarily like they could go to hell, they could go to heaven, but they're not necessarily birthed from hell.
Yeah,
That's
but
why
they're clearly about mutilation and stuff. They're not going to make you happy. Like if you had to say yes, but they are very much like umpires. They are judges. They are presiding over things. If you fall into their web, oops. And they will try and screw you over, because that's what they do in this. Even though Kirsty tries to turn the tables on them, they still try and turn the tables on her and take her anyway. But you get the feeling they're very much these characters in the background. They're immutable. They're almost like a force of nature, but they do very much stand for that.
But again, I would go back to our traditional values of what's good and evil, and the blurring in between S&M and it's just like the subculture I was talking about back in the day, where they would actually take pins in them and they would peel apart. Real people would do this, and consider this body modification art, and we perceive someone doing this as awful and subsequently evil. And I think they're just on another level that I perceive these, that somehow we're not elevated enough to see the connection between the two sensations.
Oh yeah, I mean that's what Cenobites are all about. They're about pushing you beyond the beyond.
Right.
Because Frank was not prepared for that. I mean, it is different in the book. As I understand it, in the book, they did kind of tell him, like, this is the deal. Are you sure you want it? If you say yes, there's no going back. And he says yes. But it's still not what he's prepared for. In the film, you get the impression that he's just told this is a doorway to delights of pleasure. And that's what he's after. But he gets screwed over because that's nowhere near the kind of pleasures of the flesh he's after. So it's kind of divided. But I mean, in the sequels, it makes it absolutely clear they are definitely from hell. They're working for Leviathan, blah, blah, blah. But
in the context of this film, it's not.
If you're just watching the film, there is that line where she says, go to hell. We can't. We need to take someone back with us, as in that is our home base. But aside from that line of dialogue, aside from that, you don't know.
That just gives me the impression they can go there and take someone there, but it's not necessarily their birthplace. They're angels to some, devils to others, right? Or demons to others.
And again, that encapsulates their whole deal, because it's saying, we get summoned. We don't care how we get summoned. I'm sure they've turned up to places and they are worshipped because they are these figures of worship. And then they come up to other places and people fear them and go, oh, I didn't mean to open the box, like Kirsty. So they are literally saying, we are demons to some, angels to others. Fuck you. We don't care. We're just here to take you back. They are not emotionally invested one way or that, how they are perceived. They're just putting it on the line. Yeah, we're seen by this one way or the other. We don't care how you perceive us, but we're here to take you. You're in our playground now, and that's it. That's where, Frank was foreshadowing Kirsty at that point. It's just that Kirsty was able to make a deal with them. But I mean, we'll come on to that later.
Yeah, they seem more of like a force of nature, and we will come on to that. But they were sort of like matter of the factly, a box. You opened it, we came.
Yeah.
I mean,
that's it. That's their deal. They don't care about everything else. Is icing on the cake to them.
Yeah, but I guess we'll get there. So so where were we? So Frank. They're watching the boxing match, and he's getting restless.
No. Oh yeah, Frank upstairs. Yeah, he's not watching the boxing match.
So Frank, Larry, and I'm sorry. So
because it's a thunderstorm as well.
So Frank is upstairs, and as Larry and Julia are downstairs watching the boxing match, Frank is getting restless, and he wants to be fully restored, except. The skin part actually never made sense to me, right? Everything on Frank can be restored except for his skin, where he must wear someone else's skin like a bodysuit.
Well,
Don't
or
quite,
maybe he just didn't have enough bodies to get to that stage, maybe. I will
maybe.
say in the sequel, you have Julia get resurrected in the same way, and with her, she comes back with her own
Yeah.
skin eventually. But she is literally going through loads of bodies that Frank. I don't think Frank goes through as many bodies as her. Oh no! Actually, there's a plastic surgeon, and he puts stuff on her. Yeah, I forgot that. But yeah, I mean, you don't know how many. If Frank had just kept going, maybe he'd have got to that stage.
All right, fair enough. Maybe he could have
But
regenerated
because
skin. But
as it goes on, I mean, he has an ulterior motive to look like Larry. So
I don't know. Prior to them, we're getting ahead of ourselves. Killing
Yeah.
Larry, it looks like his next stage would be manifesting.
I mean, he
skin.
wants to because he's got no emotional attachment to his brother whatsoever. He's beyond that. So he's just saying, look, I'm feeling pain and I'm frustrated about it. That's a perfectly good meat sack. Let me at it. And here we see another side of Julia, because you got the impression she's just this ice queen, but she does have compassionate feelings for Larry. She doesn't want him to die, and she doesn't want him to meet that kind of death. And then there's this other side of Frank, where there's this miniature cat and mouse game where he's clearly threatening to kill Larry, but he's emotionally abusing her throughout the entire thing, because he's realizing that's him having a power over her. Her reaction to threatening, just visually threatening Larry. And of course, poor Larry, through that entire thing, he doesn't understand what the hell is going on.
Well, he thinks his wife wants to get busy, right? Because, but she's doing that to distract him from the noises in the attic.
Please don't. No, we need to have sex. Oh, come on then. And no, I can't bear it. I can't bear it. Please, I can't. And she literally goes into a script. You can see from his point of view, he's just saying, I don't understand you. And I'm thinking from Julia's point of view, this is like a farce. And yet from his point of view, poor guy, and he still wants the marriage to be fixed. Poor guy.
He has no idea that his brother Larry is sitting behind or standing behind him without skin, cleaving a rat.
A
You know,
rat.
the flesh.
I'm not sure what that's meant to signify, just skinning a rat in front. Maybe he's trying to say this is what I want to do to Larry.
Yeah, I think so.
I don't know, but it's I mean, it's an effective visual.
Yeah.
I think there was something at the time where some animal rights groups might have got a bit uppity or something, and they had to prove they weren't actual rats or something. I don't know, but yeah, it's again, it's one of those things like less is more, because there's no big. It's all about a power play, because it's Frank having emotional hold over Julia, and she's literally begging him, and Larry thinks she's begging him, and she is having a power hold over Larry because she is distracting him, and then Larry's feeling like she's punishing him for doing the right thing, and the only person who's got no power over them is Frank. Nobody's got power except for the Cenobites, because he says the box, don't touch it, because he knows what that's about.
Yeah.
It's interesting that the box must have stayed in the room all that time.
Yeah.
Like the Cenobites didn't take it back. There was no puzzle guard. They didn't give it to another puzzle guardian, which is interesting. It must have stayed there in the room all the time.
Yeah, I guess that's kind of a plot hole. But, the audience is distracted about everything else that's going on. It's just something you just go with,
Yeah.
But looking back at it, the Guardian would have came back for it, I think.
Yeah. Or he stole it from hell on his way out, maybe.
But then again, once you go to that sequel you're talking about, I think that Doctor had like a bunch of different puzzles.
Oh, he had loads of them,
Yeah,
But it's like, what are the odds they'd be in that particular room?
Yeah. Well,
or maybe he did. Maybe Frank had bought like 7 of them, and he was going to go through them one by one.
So later on, Larry and Kirsty is at a restaurant, and after a conversation at this restaurant, Larry's daughter stops by to see her stepmother at the request of her concerned father. And what she sees is a man being invited into the house.
And by this stage, I will say, during my rewatch, I was noticing, even in the boxing scene thing before this, but in this scene, it's even more pronounced. Julia gets more and more pale, and her hair gets more obviously red, and it's like she's looking more vampiric the more she becomes murderous. And then she's in that particular scene, she's dressed like a Black Widow as well.
Yeah.
Is very fan for that, but they've made her up to look very vampiric, which is interesting because Frank is essentially a vampire at this point up in the attic.
You know, I had watched this movie recently with my wife, and she had mentioned, it wasn't me, she was like, I don't really think she's attractive. Why are these men finding her so attractive and falling over her? And I was
like, she's looking a bit more like, I think it's mostly her hairstyle looks more masculine and stuff because it's shortened. But I think that plays into later on when she starts to feel a little jealousy about Kirsty.
Yeah.
And how Frank is starting to go that way a bit. So I think that plays into it because she might be wondering, is Kirsty the next model?
Yeah, and I'm going to speak for everyone here. I don't think anyone watching this movie thinks Frank is going to stay forever with her.
No.
I mean, he's not going to be by Julia's side.
You can see why Julia would have fallen for it. Because she's probably fallen for his sentiments before.
Yeah.
So again, that's like her trap, like the Loveless. Marriage was the trap, but Frank being with a relationship with Frank has got a psychological trap of its own, and you can see why she's falling for it. But yeah,
sure.
Frank's just the dirtiest player there is. He's just
a user. He really is.
Yeah, he is an absolute user. Like even if he'd managed to get into an incestuous relationship with Kirsty as well, he wouldn't have been satisfied with that either.
Yep.
He would have done something like the next, whatever that would be. It's like he says in the earlier scene, it's never enough. What isn't it? Mm-hmm. Whatever he is doing is never enough.
And we soon find out how Frank really thinks and cares about Julia, but we'll get there.
As
in
if
a few
we didn't
minutes.
already know.
Exactly. Surprise, surprise. But so Kirsty goes inside the house to investigate, and she finds this gory humanoid that identifies himself as Uncle Frank that's feeding on the man she saw enter the house.
Yeah, isn't he like hiding around a corner and it's his victim? He's just holding on for dear life and he holds Kirsty's hand and then he just...
And he gets wrenched back and then he's like, Kirsty, it's Frank, it's Uncle Frank. You remember? Come to Daddy.
He's expecting Kirsty to go, oh yeah, okay. And he's just going to his arms.
Well, he says two lines together. You remember? Come to Daddy. And it's like, okay, so I guess you've said come to Daddy around her a lot. You know, being her Uncle Frank, and how weird and perverted and creepy is that?
He's probably said it to Julia. Like it is something like you get the sense he gets off on daddy play games. Because it's that whole power play thing. He probably gets off on that. But Kirsty's an actual relative. So he's going to really play on thick.
And what a line, come to Daddy. You know, it just creeps you out every time. Well,
it's interesting. People who've not read or like the synopsis of the novel, in that, Kirsty is not, well, Larry is named Rory, I think, in that, but Kirsty is not his daughter. She is a friend of Rory, and she's got this crush on him. And so there are some weird little moments in this where you might see a little bit of a weird vibe in this, but that's because they're like left over from that version of her. But by making her his daughter, it puts that really disturbing twist on the "come to daddy" line, especially when Frank is pretending to be Larry. So it's got that.
And there's
No,
no
you're
hiding
not
the
my daddy.
creepiness, right?
No.
The way the line is delivered by whoever actor is doing the dub here, I mean, there is no subtleness to, come to daddy. There's just
But also,
this
you're also seeing Frank for this decrepit mess that he is. He's doing a line. He probably thinks it's really cool, and hey, yeah, let's do it. Like he did right at the start when Julia remembers their first meeting when he's just coming from the rain, and he's like, "Oh, I'm a bad boy and I'm soaking. Oh, excuse me, you're going to find me a towel, bitch," sort of thing. And he doesn't look that way at all. He's all rotting, and he's like, it's when people say you're ugly on the inside, you are literally seeing his inside ugliness. He is the personification of his own inner ugliness on the outside. And of course, when he confronts her and how she gets out of it, what she does to him, she takes advantage of those physical weaknesses, and he looks really pathetic in those, and it's because he's this rotting body. So when he's saying "come to daddy," you remember you're having the correct reaction, because you're having this visceral reaction. You're thinking, Frank, you dirty little, have you seen yourself in a mirror? Do you think that? But of course, the lines he's used on Julia have been working.
Yeah.
Like even when he says, "Come here, damn you, I want to touch you," and she says, "No," but and she even does the touching the fingertips around the mouth, and he's probably so egotistical, he really does believe that's going to work. But it does
like work with Julia, and there's no level of seductiveness in it or romanticism.
It's predatory and abusive.
Yeah. And for anyone watching,
like Hellraiser was doing #MeToo back in the 80s in a weird way.
For anyone watching it, I can't see anyone in the audience finding that appealing.
No.
Even the "come to daddy," not just the line, but it's just the way it's delivered. It's just delivered in the crudest way that it's got to make every woman, every man's eyes roll back in their head, or just the hairs stand on the back. Of their neck,
you would, at first glance, you would look at the Cenobites and you would look at Pinhead and you would say, who would find that attractive? But
there's women
out there. He has a massive following.
Mm-hmm.
Like when Doug Bradley was doing one of the later sequels, apparently there were these two. It was, I forget where. It's somewhere in America, and apparently he was on break, and I think he had some of the makeup on or something. He said these two women, they came up beside her, and he said, "Oh, Mr. Bradley, you were telling," and it's, "tell us something you don't know," or something. And he said, "Well, ladies, the thing you need to know is the pins go all the way down." And their reaction was not to laugh. Their reaction was, "We were hoping you'd say that."
Yeah.
So people have that. I'm sure even dirty old Uncle Frank has his fangirls and boys out there. There are some people who probably find the thought of him in corpse guise dirtying them up a weird fetish thing. It wouldn't surprise me. So
I have heard in literal podcasts before, males and females say that the Cenobites were sexually attracted to the Cenobites in certain ways, and there's. So I'm not
with Frank too. This is what I'm saying. He is representative of that sleazy, but it's also the forbidden, because he is a walking corpse, in the same way as the Cenobites look very undead. So it wouldn't surprise me. He might. It's not going to be as high, but it wouldn't surprise me if there are some people who go, "Oh no, yeah, but Frank did it for me." What, when he was looking human? Oh no. When he was the corpse. Okay, I don't want to know you.
Well,
Hellraiser is one of those odd fandoms.
I haven't witnessed that before, but I would say the people that might be turned on by the visuals still might be turned off by the personality. Where
You would think, and yet
where you
Julia
have
wasn't.
Pinhead is more of a commanding
Yes.
presence.
Oh,
He's such a
yeah.
presence.
He's like a strict teacher.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a lot where his magnetism comes from, because people with that thing, they think that he's really into discipline and things like that, which he would be. And he would know everything like that under the sun. But he would have that command. Pinhead is what the Hell Priest is. He's not just got that presence, but he has experience. He gives, even though he's just been from World War One, but you get the sense he's got potentially thousands of years of experience in the dirtiest things imaginable. He would not only know what to do, he would know how to do it in the best and worst possible ways. Frank just wants to be a dirty old man. Which makes you wonder, what if Julia had met Pinhead? What would her reaction to that be? That could be interesting.
Frank is the lowest common denominator, where I can't, the way I perceive Cenobites in this film, and in this film only, I can never see Frank become a Cenobite, because he just doesn't have the gravitas. He doesn't have the intelligence or the wisdom. He is a grunt. He's someone to clean up after them,
He is pure appetite.
Yeah.
He doesn't have a desire to master the kind of talents. I think Cenobites would be about mastering, like they want to reach the pinnacle of that. Where, it's the difference between a chef and someone who's just a glutton. They just want to eat food. They just want to consume. A Cenobite wants to master the preparation. They want to be an absolute master or mistress at doing that thing. Because to them, it's a service. And I'm sure there are some people who have summoned them, and they actually do have the right mentality for they're not going to resist it. They want it. And a Cenobite would be glad because they've gone like, oh, finally, it's someone who can appreciate my art. I will do this service for you. Yeah. Because that's what you get when you meet an actual, a real dominatrix in the sex industry. That's what they're about. They're not about whipping people to get sadistic pleasure. They think of themselves as doing, they're doing a service, because there are people who they need that treatment for whatever reason. A Cenobite is the ultimate version of that, but a Cenobite doesn't take no for an answer. It's like, in Cenobite world there are no safe words.
Yeah. But
Frank would have the wrong aptitude for that.
Yeah, to me, Frank is an animal where
yes,
Pinhead is an artist.
Yes,
and going back to Butterball, this is why I need to take Butterball out of this group, because he doesn't seem to fit.
I love him. And we don't know. He might have just, you do see a glimpse of what he looked like in life in the sequel, which he was a rather portly man, but we don't know if that's why he became a Cenobite. It might have been like that was incidental. Yeah. But whatever because we're never given any background for him except for what he looked like. Like Chatterer, he was a young boy, and you'd go, "Oh, that's weird." Really? But it's quite chilling when you see a glimpse of him as a young boy, because that actually makes it more, because he's the most horrific looking one, and you realise when he was alive, he was the most innocent. Probably he was just a young boy. So yeah, you can never know what was the thing that made them or maybe they were all like Frank, and it just got to a point where they could appreciate it. And at that point, they become...
I can't go there. I can't go there believing they were all like Frank, because then I lose my...
I don't...
It's funny. You have, as a viewer, or at least I do, like these weird respect for these Cenobites, where I have no respect for Frank.
In fairness, in the sequel, you find out Pinhead's humanity. He was called Elliot Spencer, and he had the same motivations as Frank. He was a hedonist, and he couldn't get any more, and he went for the ultimate thing, and he did exactly what Frank did. But when they tortured him, you realise, Frank doesn't want to go back there. When it comes to the Hell Priest, when he's recounting his time there. He said that he not swift, but he said he quickly learned to appreciate it. Frank never learned to appreciate it. That's the difference between the two.
See, this is why I don't include.
Yeah, I know. It's not the kind of history I would have written for that kind of character, but because it's part of the continuity, I'm just saying if you're going to factor that in.
Yeah,
Pinhead started out like Frank, but the difference between them was that once Pinhead had been taken into hell and the torture began, it was painful, but then he started to smile and he started to appreciate that individual. Frank never appreciated the individual. He never understood how to enjoy it. Yeah. Whereas the Hell Priest did, and for him it became an art form. And very different with Frank.
Yeah, he's more of a fast
Frank
food.
Is pure hedonist, yeah.
Yeah. So, well, okay, so back to Kirsty. She fights back by shoving her hand inside
Frank.
his gushy torso.
Again, penetration.
Yep.
I mean, it's there.
And then she does the old reliable kicking him in the nuts.
And he looks pathetic as he really is, because he's just a rotting body. He's holding, and he's literally going. Whereas before he's been like to Julie, he's been, no, come here, damn you, and talk to you now. And he's got this almost Cenobite-like presence. But Kirsty, she's not a fully grown woman. She's like a teenager or so, or early 20s. She's early more 20s, physically. She comes across like Julia would be able to put up more of a fight or something. She's younger. She's more timid than Julia. Julia looks like she could get into a scrap. And he has just been defeated by a potential would-be incest rape victim, which is the ultimate insult for Frank in a way. And you just see him for what he is in that moment. And it's nice to see. It's not something you'd ever see happen with the Alien or a Predator or a Terminator, but with Frank, it's not something you see happen with a Cenobite, but with Frank.
And you would never want to.
No.
But with Frank, it's satisfaction.
It feels, you feel like, you deserve that.
Yeah.
That's his real self coming forward. It's not this bad boy persona he tries to project. That's his real self. Like, when he was crying like a bitch in hell, although I'm sure a lot of people would, and apparently the actor had to vomit after they got off filming that shot, which was the first shot they did. But he's a bitch, and he likes to make other people his bitch, and that's when he looks like the bitch he is. And I don't mean that in a sexist way. I just mean he is a bitch. No. He's a bitch in every possible way. He bitches about things. He is a bitch. He is a bitch to his vices. He is in every, and that one scene, even though he's just like part of the screen, it's not close up. But that is, when everybody says, what is Uncle Frank, they usually do all these different poses of him wearing, the Jesus sweat. It's actually that. That is Uncle Frank, holding his gonads and going, that is the essence of Frank. He's been denied pleasure and he's been exposed for what he is.
Yep. So she finally escapes by throwing the puzzle box out of the window, which distracts Frank, and then she runs out, retrieves it.
She's about to throw it at him, and because he says no, because he does that classic villain flaw, he hints that that's the wrong thing to do. So
she realized there was value.
And it's a very. I love the way Ashley Lawrence did it. It's got this very. What? Wait, did I? What? She's not sure if. And then you get, it's a very human response to what he says.
Yeah.
And she sells it really well as an actress.
Yeah, and she's really quick on her feet here, which I appreciate.
She's very resourceful. There's everybody thinks like Sarah Connor and Ellen Ripley, but it's like Kirsty Cotton. She is very much deserving of a similar heroine lead legacy.
Yeah. So eventually, due to the horror and stress of it all, as she's walking far away from this house, Kirsty faints, and some bystanders find her, and she wakes up into a hospital. And I want to stop here and mention that there is a fascinating visual of a red flower blooming on the
Yes.
television screen that will turn white quickly when the Cenobites show. And a white
There's a lot
flower.
of symbolism throughout a lot of things in that room.
Well, that's the thing here, and I'm trying to drill down on this and figure out what it actually represents, because the flower, a white flower, is often symbolic to represent
Innocence.
female virginity, even, right?
Yes.
But at this point, we've seen Kirsty in bed with the guys she met at the party, where she woke up screaming over that horrible dream she had,
Yeah.
about her dad.
Which is weird. They both seem to be sharing the same dream because he wakes up from a nightmare as well. And
Yeah, he was already up and standing. I wasn't sure. It felt like there was a little sequence before
yeah.
that scene that might have fleshed that out. Yeah, I agree. I don't quite know what was going on there, if they did indeed share the same
And
dream.
there's again that dream sequence. There's a lot of symbology in that as well. But,
Yeah.
yeah.
Or,
There's a
or
lot
I
of white in that. There's white going into red in that dream sequence.
yeah. Well,
You know, when
there's
the
that,
sheet is white and it's got white feather, and then there's blood that starts to stain the sheets.
but
It
this
becomes
time
just
it's red and
yeah.
it's blooming. But then as the
Yes.
Cenobites arrive, it's just completely flush white. And I y-
Well, also draining of color. It's draining of life.
Yeah. I mean, I
That
could
could be
see
that.
that in relation to, yeah. So do you have any other additional ideas of what this is supposed to represent at
No, I
all?
mean, I think it's one because Clive Barker, he had this whole theatrical career of playing around with lighting and all that. There are probably many things all wrapped up in one. Um, Even the pinhead thing, apparently it goes back to something he did in his theatre career, where Clive Barker, he literally got what you call a nail board, which is a board, it just had nails, and he was just experimenting with how light hit each individual nail and the silhouettes it would cast across the board and all different things. And Doug Bradley said that when he came to do Hellraiser, he said when he saw what the Hell Priest was wearing, he said, "Oh, it was Clive Barker's nail board on a human face." And he said that's very indicative of the way Clive Barker works. So I'm sure with things like the flower, there are multitude of meanings. And also some of it is it just looks good, probably. It just
Yeah, maybe it's that. I tried Googling it once, and I got some sort of angry take about it. Like, what a pretentious, it belongs in a college film. If that,
yeah, I
luckily
mean,
that
it's,
movie wasn't so good, or I would be ripping Clive Barker a new one. I don't know. I found it interesting and intriguing, and it caught my eye, and I was sitting there trying to. And perhaps it means nothing other than, it's supposed to make you ask questions, but not necessarily give
but I mean,
you
the other thing
answers.
about blooming and going back and about waking up, your senses being awakened and shutting down senses. But then you also have the bag of saline solution, and blood shoots up into it in reverse,
Yeah.
and it does so violently. So it's again penetrative act, but it's an
Yeah.
explosive one. So again, you could say there's sexual subtext in that, like an orgasm, and it's blood, which is life going into a womb. I don't know if that's what they intended, but that's a meaning you could read into it. And I mean, I like just the fact that even just her touching the puzzle box, you can see, she doesn't see it, but the audience sees that there's very brief electric interference on the TV screen.
Yeah.
Which you do sometimes read about in real supernatural events. They talk about electromagnetic fields interfering on things. But yeah, it's like they're little things she doesn't realise, and I really love the because when she does open it, and all that whole thing, it does show that when you've got a puzzle box, you're very tempted to, you just got this need to solve it, and you don't know why, you just have. But I love that shot where the brickwork is all lit up, and through each of the cracks, there's this light shining through. a lot like in Alien on the Nostromo, where you see the lights coming through the ventilation things. It's a very similar look. And then you contrast that with what's through the brick wall that opens up into that long, dark corridor with no lighting virtually. But there's so much symbolically, it's a very rich scene. Considering it's just a generic hospital ward bed, they did so much with it.
Did you see that? Did you notice that trick wall? Like I did. It's that forced perspective trick where they painted. It's maybe the tunnel from that hospital room went 5 feet max, but
Probably,
they painted a deeper tunnel within a tunnel within a tunnel within a tunnel to give a perspective that it just goes on for miles. But you could tell, at least on the Blu-ray, it's just a wall.
Yeah, Hollywood magic. Yeah, but again, it had a relatively low budget. It wasn't like a nothing, but for the kind of things they were dealing with, when you realize how small the budget, even for its time, it's a marvel that they managed to achieve what they did in it.
Oh, and you have to be fair here that in film it was, and in old theater projectors and watching it at television at home, you're dealing with a much lower resolution than what we're pumping out of these high definition Blu-ray discs. And so
I'm sure they could George Lucas it and replace things with CGI and that.
I wouldn't want them to. The
Hellraiser fandom really would kick up a fuss. Even if it would actually be an improvement, they would still be considering it blasphemy.
Yeah, it's Blu-ray is a rose, and there's thorns that come with this rose of high definition.
Yes.
You're going to see all the imperfections, and I find it charming, but
it's a part of its charm. There's a lot of little flaws.
Well, speaking of flaws, if we're going to go down this hallway, Kirsty, she runs across the engineer that proceeds to chase her down this hallway where she barely escapes. And again, like we were mentioning before, I could just see this. It's like I said, I think it's just a black painted wheelchair, and there's someone sitting in the chair and someone pushing the chair.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things they wanted to do more elaborately, and they just didn't have the budget for it, so they had to do a lesser version of what they would have wanted. So it's if you ask Clive Barker, you'd have probably said, "Oh, well, it was meant to look like such and such a thing, but we had to make do with the latex and stuff that they had to hand." Because I mean, it looks like a rubber.
Oh,
thing.
It does.
It doesn't. I mean, thankfully, it's not strongly lit up. I think except right at the end, it reappears again and it's more lit in that scene. But at that point, they're doing more close-ups of it. But yeah, I mean, it's even at the time, it looked fake.
Yeah.
It's like the Back to the Future 2 thing where Marty sees the holographic thing and he says, "Oh yeah, the shark still looks fake." It wasn't like people in the 70s thought the Jaws shark looked ultra real. They were. Back then, they knew it looked fake. Here, people knew this looked fake.
Well, it looked fake in context of the other Cenobites, right?
Yes,
or other good special effects at the time. This was 1987, the same time Predator came out, Stan Winston's Predator. And it seemed like a rushed creation. And
it wasn't a massive shooting schedule they had either.
Yeah. And it was probably a victim to its budget as well. And maybe if they had more time, they could have improved.
But I will say the actual chase sequence, you do get this palpable feeling of run, Kirsty, because it does. It's especially with that sound effect they do with the snapping jaws. It's a full sound effect, but it's still got that get away, don't get it near. And when she gets out from the she gets right to the exit and you can see it's right behind her, but it does make you go, I kind of feel it coming up behind me.
Yep.
So it's the way they shot it. It does have that
Yeah.
a sense of dynamic urgency behind the actual chase scene. So yeah,
Yeah.
like
So
the
then,
shark in Jaws.
actually, I really love the Shark and Jaws, and I thought I never
Some
when I
shots are better than others.
agreed,
Yeah,
agreed. But I think to compare the shark to the engineer, I think there's no comparison. I think the shark is light years better, and they had to operate that in the water in natural light.
yeah,
Where this even in the shadows,
yeah,
oh, it was a little rough. But
yeah.
fortunately, the wall closes and the engineer can't come through.
Although you
And
do hear it on the other side of the wall. That's what makes it a little unsettling because it closes and it's like the earlier scene where they rearrange the face on the floor and the room is empty. The wall is sealed. It's as though it never opened up in the first place. But then you hear the growling of the creature, and that sells it to the audience that Kirsty is maybe second guessing, did I hallucinate that? But then because she's hearing it then and there, she goes, oh shit, there's really something there.
well, I'll tell you what, I don't find that unsettling. But what I do find unsettling is when the other Cenobites appear,
Yes.
the Chatterer corners Christie and restrains her and disturbingly puts two of his fingers inside her mouth.
Yeah,
And it
it's
feels,
very sexual and it's very much about violation.
yeah, it feels like an invasion and unsanitary. And it just feels so icky.
Well, there
And
was, I think she injured herself. I think he I forget the details, but yeah, there was he didn't put them in correctly or something. It injured the inside of her mouth.
ooh,
Unfortunately, yeah, because you got to remember he's wearing. It's in the sequels. He's got very slit eyes. In this, he literally could not see out the mask. So whenever you see Chatterer, someone's offset saying, forward a bit, and he's just responding to what he's been told to do. He cannot see anything. So when he's walking steadily towards her, very ominously, he cannot see a damn thing. So, yeah. A lot of it's about Kirsty's reactions to him.
It's just so creepy. And just knowing what you're telling me, if that really occurred, where she, they scratched like the back of her mouth, or, how much wounds can hurt. If you scrape like the skin off the roof of your mouth, just gives me the chills.
Right. I remember reading that there was an actual incident and apologies exchanged because it was completely accidental. But it's easy to see how these things can happen.
So
it's very it veers into that Lambert tail between the legs territory. See it because there's so much that's essentially it's like the next scene is you're seeing a number of them and it's like there's the subtext of a gang rape because it's double inside an orifice and they're not letting her speak either, so they're using their power to clamp down on her right to even voice protest as well.
It's so disturbing. I think even more than the Lambert scene because we just get a hint of that, in Alien.
I mean, you can see her eyes are going wide, and it's a very visceral reaction.
Yeah,
which I'm sure poor Ashley was actually feeling at the time, but yeah,
it's terrifying. So, so then everyone's there, all the Cenobites that we know, and then Pinhead says, like I said before, matter of factly, the box you opened it, we came, which I love. It feels just like he's speaking truth. And it's just ones and zeros for him. And, Chrissy yells, it's just a puzzle box. But Pinhead counters, no, it's just a means to summon us.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
he almost does that T-1000, oh no, sort of thing. But he doesn't. He just stands there. And the vocal modulation they put in post production, it because Doug Bradley can't literally speak like that. He can put on an effect, but it's not as deep as that and booming. It kind of, because he is just Stan, it forced him to project that much more. You really feel, because again, up to this point, whenever you had like demons and devils and that, they were like ha 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 growl. And this is an eloquent representative of other, the beyond.
Yeah.
This is something, and we've just had a glimpse of, because where you've seen it open up, that's not hellfire and brimstone and pitchforks. That's somewhere like babies screaming in the distance. What the hell is it? And they have clearly come from there. That is their home. And they are just putting it down like, these are the rules. You come with us. And he literally says, oh, no tears, please. It is a waste of good suffering. That is the coin of their realm. Suffering, misery. That is what they savor that. And it's implying that we do this long enough, you won't be able to scream. So savor the ability to scream while you can.
But I would argue here that suffering is not necessarily a bad thing, that this line is blurred. And I go back to that
that's their
S&M angle.
lesson.
Look, to me, when this is where Pinhead reveals to me, at least in my interpretation, that they're not demons, not the way we know of. Because not just they're more sophisticated despite their appearance, but as they mentioned, they are explorers of experience. To me, demons are more servants of a greater evil. But to categorize yourself as explorers of experience, demons to some, angels to others, the demons to some, angels to others is more of how they're perceived. But they're explorers. And I don't see that as explorers feels independent. It feels where demons are like chained to a greater cause, a greater evil cause. And I have this up here. I have this NECA Hellraiser Pinhead from the first movie, and they offer two heads with this action figure, and one is this very angry, I am ripping not your soul apart, but I'm ripping your body apart, kind of growling teeth, like in a face that I don't think I saw in this movie.
No,
and
it's the one on the film posters. He's like that.
Yes.
Yeah.
But then there's this somber, sort of introspective, sort of sophisticated, a thinker head, and that's the head that I have him displayed here, because that was the Pinhead that I saw in the movie. And this is what stands out to me above all of the other horrific, iconic horror beings from this decade.
You find that in fan art, in Hellraiser fandom. There's one group where they make the Cenobites all angry and go, rah, and they go, I want to kill you and tear your soul apart. Which they know, he does say, if you don't do this, we'll tear your soul. Which is, I mean, that's got power, that line, because it's not about we will tear you limb from you, we will tear your soul apart. That speaks of manipulation with energy. And then there's this other group of fan art, which is much more in line with the films, as you say, where he is unemotional. You cannot appeal to him. There is no Supreme Court. You are his now, and he will do with you as he pleases because he can, and that he only cares about the rules. And it's all down the line, and it is about, let me teach you my lessons now. And it's like you said, it's about indivisible pain and pleasure, because that is what they are about. But you become a plaything for them, which is what Frank was. Frank was a plaything for them.
Yeah, I'm not necessarily believing that everyone is a plaything for them.
No, some will be students. Some will be like Elliot Spencer. They will be the ones that become Cenobites.
You have an opportunity to become student to achieve higher learning, a higher realm of existence, if you're willing to endure and if you are intelligent enough. I think there's a level of intelligence to these beings that they're not credited for. I hear that before, that, oh, yeah, they're evil. Don't you know that line? It will tear your soul apart.
Yeah.
Well, Pinhead that's his only response to if Kirsty decides to cheat them.
Because what does that imply? Tearing a soul apart? That's not medieval torture devices. That is something on a completely different magnitude. You tear a soul apart. You can't even imagine what that would consist of. And it's the ideal ultimate threat because it is something you cannot imagine. And that was Frank's whole point. He was at head in it, and they offered me experiences I could not comprehend, which is very much the same in the book. He doesn't realize what he's in for. In the book, it's described that they heighten his senses to such a degree that his skin can feel individual motes of dust colliding with it. All his senses were opened up to a degree he didn't dream were possible. That's how it was described in the book. So it makes sense for the cinematic version to be much the same, but there's no way you can convey that on screen. But here, yeah, they come across very jaded as well, because to them, if you showed them a medieval torture device, they'd know how to use it. But there's this line in the third film where a priest confronts Pinhead, and he tries to literally go, oh, I'll cast you out, blah, blah, blah. And he says, and you will burn in the hell fires for all eternity. And Pinhead has this very amused look. And he looks at him and says, burn? What a limited imagination. And that is very much them, because burning in hellfire, to them, that's tame, that's domestic. That to them is how Julia feels about her marriage. Like, there's nothing there. They've gone beyond that because they are explorers in the greater regions of experience. And to be that, everything heightens. And it is literally something you cannot describe, you cannot show on screen. So you've got to show glimpses of people who have experienced it and how their response to it is. And even here, this meeting with them, what happens to Kirsty? Couple of fingers down her throat. She hadn't actually had anything done to her. And it's traumatized her to her very core. She does not want to be in their midst ever again. And it's not even just about Pinhead, it's what the female says. Like, she tries to bargain with them, and the female says, perhaps we enjoy you more, sort of. They're not. She said,
perhaps we prefer you.
Yeah, we prefer you, which implies this, they are, they will vet you. Perhaps they want you more. They will, we lost Frank, but maybe you're the next best thing. Maybe you've got a better flavor for us, like a chef wanting the best ingredients. You'll give us the best screams or the whatever it is they're after. And they're probably after a multitude of things that will literally go into eternity, and you will never... But whatever it is, those performances sell it so good, man.
Yeah.
And it seems before, like it's something where you want to see it done on a stage because it would do just as well.
And it seems to me that if Deep Throat was in charge, she wouldn't have, as Kirsty's bartering with them, that she wouldn't have entertained it. But
no. She's a little more impulsive, maybe.
Maybe
it's the head. It's the lead Cenobite who holds her back.
Yeah, and may I stress here, because I've heard people incorrectly state that Pinhead makes a deal with Kirsty and goes back on it, and he never once makes a deal. When Deep Throat says to Kirsty, "Perhaps we prefer you," Pinhead reacts to her deal of, where she barters, I could lead you to Frank, and you could take Frank instead of me. Yeah. He responds to the deal with a conditional maybe. and then follows it again with another maybe.
Maybe, yes.
Yeah.
He never says, yes, we will sign here. It just says, it is up to us whether we will decide it is good enough.
Yes. And then that's when they warn her if Christie cheats them, that's when Pinhead says, we'll tear your
All
soul.
bets are off, yeah.
Yeah, we'll tear your soul apart. And this is appealing to me. You know, the traditional monster comes to Earth and he's here to tear souls apart. You know, Eric, you and I became friends for our love for Alien and Predator. And I know we've had conversations before that my love for Predator was not because he's a psychopathic killer, but he was more complex than just chasing humans for blood or for death. That
methodical.
That I appreciated the Predators presented to us in Predator 2, that there was additional layers to them, that they weren't just there as evil. They weren't evil personified, that they had rules, they had conduct, they had code. And they let the main character in Predator 2 lives. And I guess this correlates to my reaction to Pinhead and these Cenobites, that I love that, to me, in this film, they are not personified evil. To me, they are not demons, agents of the devil, but they are something different, something more complex, and some sort of sensual sensibilities that we can't even fathom. And you know what? I don't want to fathom. That's part of the enjoyment of this. That
yes.
You know, it's like the space jockey being ambiguous. I love until until Prometheus, but I love not knowing and just pondering us not knowing. You know?
Well, there was some according to Doug Bradley, they had shot these, but we've never, so far as I'm aware, seen the footage. They did shoot scenes of all the Cenobites in these like cubicles, and they had lots of arcane things all on the walls, and apparently they were just going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. It was showing you that in hell they have their own obsessions. So in their way, they're like Frank. They have their own vices, but they were in these little cells, little cubicles, and they were just going pacing back and forth, because they had their own obsessions. But it doesn't mean to say that's all they did, but it was showing you that that's what they were doing until the box opened, and then they were summoned elsewhere.
Do you know why it was cut out?
Nope. I mean, maybe it's like Ridley Scott cutting the cocoon sequence. Maybe it just messed with the timing. It would have been interesting to see that. I would like to see the footage. But it would have added something to them, because again, that's not all they do. But it would be interesting to see that little glimpse of when they're not on Earth. This is an example of what they. This is their torment, but it's a willing torment.
Yeah. Okay, so let's get to the home stretch here. Larry arrives home, and now finally Julia is willing to sacrifice her husband for Frank to get some skin, literally, and so they could run away together. But
at that point, she's taught her and Frank, because I think there's a telephone in the background, and they are really worried because Kirsty's taken the puzzle box, and Frank thought as long as he had the puzzle box, the Cenobites aren't going to come after him. So now the puzzle box is out in the world. He doesn't know what's happened to it. Kirsty has escaped, so they are now fretting that somebody is going to find out, and even if it's not the Cenobites, the police will come, which Julia has to worry about. So they are now heavily invested, more than they thought they would have to be. So that sets the background for why Larry's here. Okay, maybe we should do something with him now.
I hear you, and I agree with that premise. But once Larry is dead and Frank is wearing his skin, they decide to have passionate sex with each other. So apparently, with a skin body, with the skin body up in the basement or up in the attic, and the threat of the cops coming, the threat of the Cenobites coming. Apparently, they are not in too much of a rush
Well, at
to
that
escape.
point, all he has to do is impersonate Larry. If the police come knocking, he can just say, "No, nothing's happened here," or if Kirsty comes, he can then pretend, which he does. He could just pretend. He can play.
Yet, and I don't understand why Kirsty doesn't see this, but you could see the seams and blood all over.
I know, yes. Yeah.
Of
Although,
Little
in
Larry's-
fairness, he does say, "I killed Frank," but I was still watching it. I was thinking she should mention.
Imagine if H.R. Giger's Alien.
It's like it's a little too much. She should at least be commenting on it. Something.
Dad, your shirt collar is drenched in blood.
Yeah.
You might want to go to a doctor.
Yeah. Like I thought when I was watching, I was thinking, if they did remake this, and like I don't want them to, but
The
just
Giger design.
argument's sake, if they did remake this, I think it would work better if there's not that implication that they killed Larry. I think it would work better if the audience didn't know.
Yes.
And that we were in the same position as Kirsty. Like when she finds out, that's when we start to go, oh, wait, that's not Larry. Because he's starting to do little quirks and things. I think it would have worked better. Like it doesn't work badly the way it's done, because it's more of a cat and mouse game, and we're aware of who's the cat. But I think it's I would have preferred it if we would have found out along with Kirsty that that's not Frank isn't upstairs now.
I agree. Instead of the audience being ahead of Kirsty, but to find out together, it would have been much more dramatic. Yeah,
and it would have given it a little bit extra rewatch value, because the next time you see it, you're looking out for little signs. Like this is pre-face off.
That's true. So Kirsty gets home, and Frank is posing as her father, and he says that he killed Frank, and Kirsty feels this need to see that dead body.
He's chewing the scenery in that point. He's like, "Oh, he did unspeakable things, unspeakable." And what's interesting, apparently the actor, he said one of the things that he liked about the script was it gave him an opportunity to play, like in Face Off, he got to play Larry and Frank, because it's the same actor, but he's now taken over from what the other actor did, and he's following those threads through, and he's having to do the same character. But it's a different actor playing it now. In fact, it is technically 3 different actors who play Frank throughout the whole thing. But yeah.
Mm-hmm. But I'm still so distracted by the blood on Larry that I would feel better in this movie if she brought it up, if someone brought it up, because I'm like, why isn't Kirsty saying, "Daddy, you're bleeding all over"? And he explained, yes, battle wounds against my brother.
Right. Yeah, it would have made sense. Yeah. He said, that's.
Mm-hmm. But okay, so she goes up into the attic and sees the skinless body, and then the Cenobites appear, wanting the man who did this.
And she still thinks that's Frank.
Yes. So thinking the Cenobites actually want her dad for killing Frank, Kirsty runs down to save him. But to make a quick story short, even shorter.
The Cenobites are not being very helpful, are they? They could have said, look, your dad's face.
I know. They're not very, I was wondering, I mean, they, for being so powerful and so seeing of so much and at a higher state of consciousness, the fact that they need Larry, who's really Frank, confess.
But I think that goes back to not blasphemy, but it's a mockery of religion. It's like when you hear about in real life cases like demonic entities, they mock the Holy Trinity. Like here, they want to mock the Catholic ideal of a confession. I think it's they were going for that angle in it. It's just that like they don't need him to confess, but it's like they say, we wanted to hear it from your own lips. And she says it the female Cenobite, she says it in a very sneering way, like, we knew it was you, we just wanted to, you dirty fucking thing.
Okay.
I mean, you don't know it's that, but I'll say that's my impression. They just wanted that Eck. They wanted him to damn himself.
Right.
And that's a lot of what this film is about. A lot of these characters damn themselves, not necessarily while consciously realizing it, but they're doing it all the same.
Right. Okay, so we jumped ahead a little. So Christy runs downstairs, but she quickly finds out that, okay, it's not her dad that lives, but it's Frank. So it's time now for Frank and Julia to kill Christy. But as Julia is restraining Kirsty, yeah, I just keep saying Christy. I know, because I don't know anyone. Maybe it's a British thing, Kirsty. There's so
Kirsty Alley.
There's so many Christies out here, not Kirsties here in the United
the
States.
other thing, it's somebody did point out. I was reading up about the film, like behind the scenes stuff, and somebody did point out in an article that it's interesting that you do have this religious iconography, like the statues of the saints and things, and also her name is Kirsty, which sounds like Christ. And also at the start of the film, she is like, there's white lighting behind her and things like that. So I don't know if that was done deliberately, but it might have been Clive Barker wanting to give her a name like Christ to
maybe. Well, I want to take
Kirsty.
I want to take this moment and apologize for the last 3 hours of saying Christy when I should be saying Kirsty. But and who knows, I might have said Julie versus Julia a few times too. But so Kirsty is being restrained by Julia, but she evades Julia's grasp just in time for Frank to stab her stepmother instead. But this is where
for Kirsty, but no, because just before that, he tries it on with Kirsty in a very obvious manner. She scratches his face.
Yeah.
That's what triggers Frank to think, right, okay, games, I'm going to use you as a meat sack now because you're pissing me off too much. It's not like he decided to just murder her from the outset. He wanted to go he wanted to do the obvious with her. He wanted to have full-on incestuous rape with Kirsty.
Well, she figured it out because Frank wasn't hiding it well enough.
Because it's the second time she's fought back against him and drawn blood. So it's got to be really, because that's like he's really losing face to Kirsty now, of all people, his own niece.
But it was the way I think Frank was talking to her as her father, Larry, that she was able to figure it out, if I recall. So Frank isn't doing a good job impersonating Larry. You know, he just doesn't have the kindness enough or the temperament.
But his heart's not in it, to be honest. Yeah. He's just playing a game.
Yeah, you know, at some point, even if they left as a family, that at some point he would be trying something incestuous with her. And even though he's supposed to be her dad. And but
I think Frank's the kind of guy who would get off on it more, knowing he's having sex with her, looking like her father. Even if she realizes it's him, I think putting that trauma into her, the added layer, I think he would get off on it more.
What an awful individual.
He is. He's got, I can't think of any redeeming qualities in Frank.
Yep.
Like I'm sure there's something I'm missing out on, but there's like maybe it's he tells Julia not to touch the puzzle box because that's some sort of protectiveness. But aside from that, he's pure selfishness and in the most loathsome possible way. And he is a literal psychopath. He's got no emotional. Everyone's an object for use.
It's possible he doesn't even want Julia to touch the puzzle box because he doesn't want, her to accidentally trigger the Cenobites' arrival. So he might be just totally lost.
He's got no redeem. Like Larry's clearly got redeeming. Kirsty, even Julia's got some redeeming qualities. It's just that she just sinks so low that she can't crawl out.
Yeah.
She does try and protect Larry, and it's just she's got her own addictions and vices. Frank, there's nothing there.
And that's why when he accidentally stabs Julia, it comes to no surprise that he says, "Nothing personal, babe."
Yeah, he just,
Nope.
he's just sorry, babe.
Yeah,
and he's
never-
off to the next thing. He's gonna treat Kirsty like he treated her.
Yeah, but he not only
Like he drains her,
yeah.
and yet that wound didn't heal. I expected that wound to heal, but
see, and this is what I'm wondering. That is, as far as I know, he's completely restored. So, is this just a power Frank has now that he's able to drain life force? Because I don't think his body needs.
I think probably he'd still need some. Like you can see round the edges of the face, it's still his skull and stuff. So he's grown hair and he's not complete. So you don't. God knows what his shaft is like.
Yeah.
The very thing he wants to use on Kirsty. Let's be honest.
Yeah. So let's just wrap it up.
Well, he's used it on Julia, so it must be in functional order. But he's probably thinking I can always make more improvements. It's really weird thinking about.
So let's wrap it up. Well, that's the question. Even if he's fully restored, I wonder if he would still have such a power.
Also, I mean, is he rotting? Is he able to gain flesh? And as soon as he gains it, is it starting to decay?
So that's a good question. Yeah.
There's that possibility.
So let's wrap it up with Julia. So Julia, even though it doesn't happen immediately in sequence, Julia apparently runs off to the bedroom, or I guess crawls off, right? Because she's in some bad shape. She's not dead. And decides...
No, she's dead. He drains her of life force, and she literally just falls and thumps over by the stairs.
No,
later on, she is arranged on the bed. Yeah, so it's assumed. But she's got a puzzle box as well.
She has a puzzle box in her hand, so I don't see her as dead. I see her as drained, kind of like how the second man she brought home wasn't completely dead when he was reaching out to Kirsty. And he still had life force left in him. But
she was literally just slumped. There was nothing.
Well, she looked incredibly...
thing is, in the book, it's described that she does crawl over to the bed, and not just get into the bed, but she gets in her wedding dress, and then she lays down. And it describes that she's all the more beautiful for the fact that she's surrounded by decay and carnage. It would have looked stupid if they did that in the film, because nobody's going, just 1 minute, I've got to get my corset on and all the rest of it. So I think they were taking it from that, but I think because she's also got the puzzle box, which she didn't have, I think that's more likely the Cenobites arranged her like that, like it's a mockery of her.
See, I took this aspect that she actually opened the puzzle box, and this is what one of the Cenobites did for her, which would, I guess, segue into the sequel, not to apply the sequel to this film, but she was in the area, the Leviathan, the labyrinth, or whatever that was.
Yeah.
So she was in the Cenobite world, right? So I think the only way you get there is through the puzzle box. You open that door. So I don't know. This was my impression that happened to Julia.
It could just be that she's committed that much murder that she's just gone to hell conventionally. It's not she's gone through the puzzle, but it's just like that would have been where she ended up anyway. Because she's not a Cenobite, she's like Frank. It's just that because she has not been tortured by Cenobites. She's just ended up in hell. That's the difference with her. She's not been taken by them. So that she's just ended up in hell just by her actions.
But I don't see that as hell. Well, okay. We'll agree.
That's what I'm saying. In the sequel, it's definitely they make it clear that's hell.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So
it's a labyrinth made up of dirty mattresses.
That's another podcast.
It's a low budget British film. That's what you unfortunately get.
So back to Frank and Kirsty. So after some cat and
Yes.
mouse, right, of her hiding and him, come out, wherever you are. He doesn't say that, but it seems
No.
like it would be fitting.
It's more of a realistic predator thing because
Yes,
you could see him. He's not just listening out for, but he's got these little facial expressions, very predatory, like animalistic, and he moves. He does a fake out basically, but
right.
it looks like a home invasion would play out.
But eventually, Frank leaves, and she thinks he went downstairs, but he comes out of the attic and then starts boxing her into the attic. And
The room that he came
Frank
from.
then unknowingly reveals to the hidden Cenobites that he is indeed Frank. He confesses he's Frank in Larry's skin, basically, and then ultimately, in a nutshell, masses of chain hooks shoot out and latch upon the flesh of Frank.
Yeah.
And before he's ripped apart, Frank licks his lips and
Yeah.
smiles a little bit, saying, Jesus wept.
And that
And
line was completely improvised on set.
yeah, I heard that by the actor.
Yep.
Yeah, like
It's
Clive originally wrote like "fuck you" or something, or
Yeah,
"fuck
it's
off."
something like that. But that line, it's beautifully delivered, and it's like Frank's turning a little bit demented because he does do that smile. So you wonder, is he starting to enjoy it a little? I mean, he doesn't want to go back there, but he's making the best out of a bad situation.
Well, I do believe in the beginning of the film when Frank was, or actually when Frank was sort of being reconstituted with the help of Julia and Blood, that when he was describing his situation, he did describe it as pain and pleasure. His initial encounter with the Cenobites, so he did at least understand maybe surface level of this merge, this blurred line between the two sensations. But
Yeah,
yeah, to me, Frank saying Jesus wept really feels like he's
it.
mocking the Son of God
Yeah,
from Christianity, that
yeah,
he's making a comparison between him and Jesus and ridiculing Jesus, that the pain Jesus experienced, because that verse was in the Bible, that Jesus wept, that the pain that Jesus experienced that caused the Son of God to weep prior to his crucifixion is nothing like the pain Frank himself is experiencing right now, and Frank is relishing it.
yeah.
At
The
least
word I
that's
was trying to think of earlier was sacrilegious, and this is very sacrilegious. Just that. I mean, there's a whole there's a lot of meaning just saying that word, that phrase in the way he said. It's a mocking of, you could say, God. But I mean, he's just saying Jesus. Like it's the kind of thing people do say in response to finding, encountering pain or frustration. But he's smiling as he said it.
but
It's such a slithery. It's very frank.
I think he's feeling pleasure too. Um, the way he's smiling and he's licking his lips. Like I remember, oh geez, a young guy, a long time ago. I used to listen to this American popular radio host called Howard Stern, and he was like number one syndicated in U.S. radio, and he would have all these strange people on, and he had this one woman on that actually what had derived pleasure, sexual pleasure from amputation, and she
Yeah.
actually had lost a couple of her toes on purpose, had removed some of her toes, and she achieved some sort of weird pleasure out of this. And there's probably some sort of clinical
Yeah, there is. There's a diagnosis for that.
Yeah. So, I apply all of this to this, that I think, as Frank said, there was pleasure and pain. He said both words when he was describing what happened to him after Morocco. To now, I think he is feeling some of that pleasure sensation and saying, my God, Jesus wept at this. This is somewhat a pleasure.
Well, it might be. I mean, you could also say he is laughing in the face of adversity.
True.
There's a lot of different meanings you could, and also because it was improvised, spur of the moment. It's just like the actor maybe it was a religious phrase that came to mind, and it just sounded cool. I don't know. It's something about that choice of phrase and the way it was delivered. It just feels like it encapsulates Frank. He is chained up on hooks. His face is coming off, and he's smiling, and he says, "Jesus wept."
Yeah,
And it sounds weird to say, but that's movie magic right there. It's a grotesque form of it, but it's one of those classic scenes. Jesus wept, and it's chilling.
It is. All right. So with Frank gone,
and they tell Kirsty that this isn't for your eyes, but I think she looks anyway.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things she can't look away, kind of thing. But once Frank is ripped apart, basically Pinhead's maybe turns into a, nah, Christy, we still want you to. But Christy finds out, eventually also with her boyfriend showing up by her side, is she's able to defeat the Cenobites one by one, except for Butterball, as you mentioned before, who's actually crushed under rubble.
Yeah. I mean, you do find out he is in hell in the sequel, but it's weird how it plays out. Yeah.
Well, some audience members have said they were in hell during the sequel, so that sequel isn't as beloved as this first film is. But
no, that's fair to say. Yeah.
Yeah, but by putting,
yeah, I think we're talking about like the female Cenobite. I think it's the female who is the first one to start rounding on Kirsty. I think she appears at the bottom of the stairs, and she gets this hook, and it starts scratching a bloody path up the wall.
Yeah.
And she's clearly wanted. She's got a thing for Kirsty. She wants Kirsty. But then the rest of them start to regret because, as you pointed out, they just said maybe.
Mm-hmm.
And they're living up to that. Kirsty did, after all, open the box.
She did.
So she did. There's that. But she, as you say, she gets hold of the box, which is in the dead cadaver of Julia on the bed, lying back, and it's in her hands, and she's holding it like this, and it's like rigor mortis or something, but she gets it out. She somehow knows she's got to solve it, put it back. She got to put the toothpaste back in the tube, and as they close in, she starts doing that, and they do what Frank's fatal flaw was when they said, "No, don't do that." And she's like, "Oh, okay.
Don't do that.
Better do that."
Okay,
Better do that then.
Yep.
So she does Rubik's Cube sign, and then random engineer, and then she's got a battle for it. And then, but she does them like one by one, the energy. There's this yellow energy, which is interesting because they appear in white energy, but they leave in yellow energy. So I don't know what symbolism of that is, if any, but yeah.
Yeah. But I guess she seemingly, some of them I think got the impression they were killed, but I just assume they're seemingly returning to their dimension.
Yeah, they just got exiled. Which is, that speaks to how, like, typically in folklore, demons and similar otherworldly entities are dispatched. They're never killed, or they're rarely killed or destroyed. They're usually either exiled, or it's made so that they cannot harm any longer. And that's what happens here. These are not killed. Maybe Butterball. They're not killed. They're just they made it so they are rendered harmless. They are exiled away.
Yeah.
And she seals the portal, basically. And it looks like the house collapses around them because there's a flash of light through the windows, but then are they just looking around for a random bonfire to toss the thing into? It's not quite clear whether it's the same location or not.
Well, I got the impression it's supposed to be the burned down house, but it looks like it's in a completely different location because I see all these like corporate buildings in the background.
And there's like a burning chair. There's burning furniture around. It's really...
it looked like they ran out of money and this was their best.
They probably did. They meant to explain it and they couldn't afford the exposition scene.
I got the impression that this was a low budget way to say the house burned down and this is just remnants of what's still on fire. And no fire.
Done a poltergeist.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, maybe. And so as the house ultimately has burned down, perhaps, Kirsty throws the puzzle box into the fire to get rid of it. And then that eerily looking man,
the vagrant, the insect muncher,
has been
the
stalking
bearded...
Yeah, she's been
That's
stalking.
where Big Beard Cat went on to do. That's one of his grandkids from Prey.
Well, he's more capable of this Big Beard. And he grabs the box out of the fire and doesn't mind that he's burning alive. And until he becomes this like winged skeletal deer demon that
I've heard apparently that was a skeleton they found that was for some other movie, and they just said, okay, we'll use this. I don't know how true that is, but that's what I've heard. They found it, that it was on the production lot or something. So it was, but I mean, it fits. It's just I don't know how it got hold of the box in those big taloned hands.
You know what? I am a lot happier with this winged skeletal, whatever it is, than the engineer in regards to aesthetics.
It's more in keeping with the thing.
Yeah. So then finally,
switches.
Finally we're back to that merchant in Morocco again with the box back on the table, and he's asking a new customer, "What's your pleasure, sir?" And then the end and credits roll.
Yeah, because you see Kirsty and her boyfriend, like the shot, it pulls away and they become that little circle in the puzzle box, and then they do that matte shot thing where it's meant to line up, but it doesn't quite.
So, Eric, what are your final thoughts and a review score, if you choose to give one, for 1987's Hellraiser?
I mean, it's I don't want to say a flawed masterpiece, but it's a flawed classic. But a lot of the flaws are because Clive Barker, it was his first time doing a feature-length film with a bigger budget than he'd ever had before. But I think because there are those flaws, it pushes my review down from like an 8 out of 10. I'd have to say, like, these days, 7 out of 10. But I think probably when it was released, I'd have done more of like an 8 out of 10. But it's because it feels like a very domesticated art house type film. But there are those moments in it where it just when you think it's feeling like a soap opera, it becomes something so much more, and it's a thought-provoking film above all else, and a lot of that is down to the genius talent of Barker's writing. But there are those little weird moments in it that you go, huh? So it's not perfect. There is no perfect Hellraiser film, unfortunately. But in terms of the series as a whole, this is probably without seeing the new one yet, I'd probably say it's like, this is the gold standard to come up to. It's just, it could have done more of certain things, less of others, but for its time, you can't deny it's groundbreaking for its time. If you're doing a museum of horror, Hellraiser absolutely has earned its place. Not so much with the sequels, but the original, it's there's some great performances and great writing. I think it shows what you can do with a low budget if you can look for making something as effective as you can on a low budget and with little experience.
All right, for me, well, I'm practically all out of words for this movie, and it's not to the movie itself. It's just I really went into this podcast with the intention of maybe maxing it out at 2 hours.
Yeah, I noticed that.
And
how long have we gone? Oh, okay, we've gone a bit longer, and we were still on the beginning.
At least 3 hours and 15 minutes, and it's been a wonderful discussion with you, Eric. And
we try and make it comprehensive, and we try to explore what there is to explore. So yeah,
and I think we've offered a lot of meat to chew on here, and I think it's a great podcast. But I believe pretty much I've said all I can say about Hellraiser 1987.
It's very much a film of its time. Like I don't think it's aged well. Is the thing. It's like Aliens has aged well, Predator has aged well. Hellraiser is it feels very low budget 1980s British horror film. It's not going to pass for more than it is, and yet it was so much more than the sum of its past. It's a weird paradox of a film.
Yeah. But yet, beyond that, it's still a high recommend for me.
Yeah. It's very much a cerebral film.
Mm-hmm. In regard to my score, and I'm not going, instead of recapping everything I said, what I'll do is just equate this to a 3D optical illusion arts. I don't know if you guys have ever seen that at museums or Ripley's Believe It or Not museum or something, but
on a sliding scale of dinosaurs.
Well, basically, this film on its surface level, this movie can be flat, unimpressive, two-dimensional, but if you relax your eyes, don't blink, and if you see past the surface art, not to throw in some puns, but this film has such pleasures to show you. And because of that, it gets a 8 out of 10 for me. And I don't know. I apologize to the late, great Roger Ebert, but I must humbly disagree with you, sir, because this movie is a high recommend for me, and it's worth the watch. But you need to be looking for deeper layers. This is not just a thrill-seeking horror movie, but it's supposed to connect with you on a deeper level. And if you're not in the mood to go there, this is not the film for you. If you don't like films that go there, this is not the film for you.
You need to be in a very patient mood to watch this film.
Yeah. And if you are, it'll pay dividends.
Yeah.
So high recommend them around the horror genre. Maybe I'd give it a 9 among the horror genre itself.
See, the thing is, I think both of us would say we would disagree. If we could talk to our past selves, we would say, no, you've got it wrong. And we would be able to tell our past self, because we both had different views of it upon our first watch. I think especially in this day and age, someone who's never seen it before because of all the other things they will have been exposed to. This is one of those things that inspired a lot of things that have copied it along the way. So it'll be like Blade Runner. If you think, oh, wow, it's got flying cars, but so many things have done flying cars since Blade Runner. So you've got to evaluate it in terms of this was something which spurred, it spurred, it gave birth, like Frank, it gave birth to a lot of imitators, but rarely has the writing been as on point as it was here with Clive Barker.
Yeah. Yeah. And this movie, as a result, was definitely a pleasure. So,
a pain and a pleasure.
A pain and a pleasure. But not doing this podcast with you, Eric. It's only been a pleasure. So,
and you too.
Thank you. And hopefully it was a pleasure for all of you out there listening too.
Yeah.
And for Eric and I, as we are explorers of the further regions of cinematic experiences,
yes.
Who knows what movie we'll tackle next?
Bob's Burgers, the movie. I'm coming up to that soon, actually. Hey, Bob.
Well, it might not be that, but I can promise you, whatever it is, we'll certainly be back. So,
yeah, they're going to make a series of these things.
Yep. All right. Also, thank you, Eric. Thank you all for listening. And that's it, kids. We'll see you next time.
Until next time.